Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, I Like Your Spots, by Weewoo_1324. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin chapter 1, and then one random night where everything changes. Izuku Midoriya was just a normal guy with a normal life. Kaken. Izuku's notebook was tossed into the fountain. He watched with a tear-stained face as the water seeped into the flimsy paper. Katsuki Bakugou, or Kaken, as Izuku called him, stood with a sneer. Bakugou was his ex-childhood best friend, and his biggest bully. Tomorrow would be their first day of high school, and Bakugou was not impressed that Izuku was following him. The school cost a decent amount to get into, and even though Izuku's mom owned the most well-known bakery in town, the angry blonde had hoped that he would have gone somewhere else. "Do you even know how much research is in that notebook?" the green-haired boy said and bit his lip. "It's so hard to find anything about the Miraculous in the library." The blonde raised his eyebrows and scoffed, which only caused the smaller boy to shrink back further. "The Miraculous? Seriously, Deku? That was something we found as kids, they're not real. You're such a nerd." Bakugou stared at Izuku for a moment and scanned his face. The freckled boy looked up at him, confused at why he had stopped talking. Eventually the silence had enveloped them, only being broken by the occasional noise of a child's laughter. Bakugou broke the connection and shrugged his jacket on further, even though it was perfectly fine before. He walked to the crosswalk, and for some reason Izuku shot to his feet to chase him. When they both arrived there, the blonde scowled, but noticed the notebook had been forgotten in the fountain. An old man stood across them waiting for the signal to change so he could cross the road. The man looked up at the light, which was still bright red, and took a step into the crosswalk. "Sir!" Izuku shouted and looked to see there weren't any incoming cars. The blonde beside him clicked his tongue and watched the old man hobble across. Izuku was frantically whipping his head to check around. Bakugou sighed loudly and grabbed the green-haired boy by his wrist, then dragged him over to the man. "Oh my God! This is how I'm going to die," Izuku said with his eyes closed. "I didn't know you hated me that much, Kaken." Bakugou snorted and stared at the floor, realizing his outburst. They took hold of each side of the old man's arms and led him back to the side they were originally on. "You're fine, nerd." The man stared at them. He was quite tall and lengthy with scruffy blonde hair. He wore a loose white shirt and baggy green pants. "Thank you, young man." He shook both of their hands with a slight bow. The light hit him and Izuku noticed the green bracelet dangling from his skinny wrist. There was a turtle shell in the middle. "My name is Toshinori." He nodded to the two boys to introduce themselves. Izuku stumbled over his words a few times and was able to get his name out after a pathetic amount of time. Bakugou glared at the man with a scoff and replied with his name like he was forced to. "Bakugou. Like the fashion designer." "It's my dad," he said and clicked his tongue. Then the blonde seemed to realize that he was standing on the sidewalk, talking to a random stranger, with Izuku. He spun on his heels and crossed the street at the now green light without looking back. "I'm really sorry about that, sir. Kaken is just like that sometimes." Toshinori simply hummed in response and linked both of his hands behind his back. With a small nod he walked away from the freckled boy. Izuku remembered his notebook and followed slightly afterward, then turned away. Before he completely separated from the man, Izuku caught him muttering, "Interesting. Very interesting. I need to sit in the front, Kaken." "I have bad eyesight," Izuku pleaded as the blonde attempted to rip him from his seat. "Go sit in the back, Deku. I need to be up front. You shouldn't even be in this class." The two were so focused on their fighting, well, Bakugou fighting at least, they didn't notice someone approaching them. Standing behind the blonde was a slightly taller boy with multicolored hair and heterochromatic eyes. He pressed his mouth into a thin line and tapped Bakugou on the shoulder. "It is the first day of class." "This is inappropriate," the boy deadpanned. Bakugou released his hold on Izuku. The red-haired boy sitting beside him smiled awkwardly and fixed his wrinkled uniform. The blonde whipped around to stare into different colored eyes. "What the F do you want, half and half?" He sneered and swept his gaze up and down the taller boy. "My name is Shudo Todoroki," he said plainly, not fazed by the use of the insulting nickname. "Didn't ask, don't care, candy cane." Izuku shuffled out of the seat and bowed to Todoroki. "I'll change seats." Izuku scrambled to a seat higher up and Todoroki followed him silently. The blonde smirked and took a seat beside the boy with the spiky crimson hair who was trying his best to greet him. Their class was filled with peculiar people. Surprisingly, there were more people with colored hair than natural colors, and they all seemed to have accessorized their uniform to fit their own sense of style. Most students chatted amongst themselves waiting for the teacher to arrive. A knock sounded at the door. A boy with a strong figure pushed up his glasses and walked almost robotically to the door. He swung it open and snapped into a bow in the shape of a right angle. Everyone in the class craned their head to get a look at their teacher and were surprised to see a yellow sleeping bag. "Aizawa," the man in the sleeping bag said, and made his way into the class. He pushed his inky hair away from his face and stared with his tired eyes. He sighed, sensing the confusion on the class's face. "Is my name?" "This class is going to be interesting," Todoroki said quietly to Izuku. "What's your name?" Izuku gaped at him. Todoroki had said his first statement with utmost sincerity. The green-haired boy groaned internally, realizing he was sitting next to someone who was more socially inept than himself. But he had stood up for Izuku against Bakugou, and that meant he was at least a kinder person than the blonde. Not that that was a hard task. "Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya. Thanks for helping me out." Todoroki nodded, and Izuku found himself studying him. He had half red and half white hair, along with one eye being gray and one eye being blue. Along with his tall athletic build and nice face, Izuku was prepared for the girls to be all over him. Another thing the freckled boy was not excited about. Sitting on the other side of the aisle to him was a girl with a round face and a brown bob. She was placed beside the robotic boy who was listening to Aizawa readily. Once their assignment was given, which was just a big class icebreaker, everyone mingled and got to know each other. Izuku learned the robot boy was in fact 100% human, and was just from one of those fancy families. His name was Tenya Ida. The girl who flushed an even deeper red whenever she accidentally made eye contact with Izuku's name was Ochako Uraraka. He talked with a few other people, a frog-like girl named Tsu and someone named Yayorozu, who insisted they call her Momo. Within the class there was a separation. Bakugou talked to a group of people closer to the front and Izuku talked to people in the back. It was nice. Izuku was happy to make friends that didn't have anything to do with the blonde. A small part of him wished that Bakugou would have been his friend in high school. He only realized that that would stay a wish when his notebook was soaked. When the day ended, Izuku traded numbers with the people he had talked to and made his way home. Thankfully, the bakery was just across the street from his school. On his way out he ran straight into the fencing tryouts. Bakugou stood poised in his fencing attire as he began his match with another student. Izuku stood dumbfounded as he watched his ex-best friend fence. He was so graceful, Izuku got lost in watching him and was snapped back into the presence when he heard a girl yelp. He rushed outside to see Momo walking down the stairs trying to shake something off her leg. Attached to her was a very short child. Then Izuku realized it was one of their classmates. Mineta. Momo was screeching as she attempted to pry him off her leg while pinning her skirt down so he couldn't look up. Mineta was drooling at the mouth while he attempted to climb higher. "Come on, it's not like people will see you for much other than this. I've got your magazines at home." Izuku ran over and wrapped his hand around Mineta's neck. With a clean wrench of his arm the pervert was ripped off of Momo's leg and flung down the stairs. He tumbled slightly and regained his balance at the bottom step. When the boy, who resembled a grape, looked up to see Izuku, who was panting with rage, he scrambled to his feet and sprinted away. "Are you all right, Momo?" Izuku asked, softening back to his usual demeanor. He reached a hand to her shoulder that she brushed off. "It's fine. I'm used to it, I'm really good at making stuff, but my family just pose me for photo shoots in their cars. It's not surprising that people just see me as a model." "Maybe he's right," she shrugged and slung her backpack over both shoulders. "See you around, Midoriya." Izuku stood frozen, part of him wanted to chase after Momo. But by the time he had processed fully what she said, she was already climbing into her fancy car. When the car drove off, he realized what brand it was. Momo was part of the Yaoyorozu family, a luxury car brand. Feeling very guilty, he tried his best to shake it off. When he opened the door to the bakery, the familiar bell sounded and part of him relaxed. His mother was inside baking croissants. The warm smell made Izuku's mouth water. He snatched one off the table and gave her a kiss on the cheek. "I'll be up after this batch is out of the oven, Zuku." "Okay, Mom," he said, muffled by the croissant shoved in his mouth. Opening the door at the back of the bakery, Izuku ran upstairs and set his bag in the living room, only taking out his books and phone. Then went to the top floor, which is where his bedroom was. Some people saw it as an attic, Izuku saw it as a secret hideout. Littering his walls were posters of comic book heroes, and his drawers were filled with research about real heroes. While there weren't any where he lived, he knew the United States had heroes. He was convinced their abilities came from the miraculous, magical jewelry that possessed powers to be wielded by the wearer. He also had a knack for fashion, so covering his floors were balled-up papers of failed designs, and he had a pile in his room of hero costumes he'd made. On his mannequin was something he was making to look like the comic hero All Might's costume. Izuku went to set down his books on his desk, and as he did, noticed something skid across the floor. It was a jewelry box of some sort. The box was wooden with engravings on the top. The freckled boy opened the box to be greeted with a pair of red earrings with spots. They looked like ladybugs. Izuku reached to take them out, and something appeared in front of him. It had spots like a ladybug, except it had a huge head, a little body and whiskers on the side of its face. Then it said, "Hi. I'm Tiki." Izuku screamed. In a room bigger than most people's apartments sat Bakugou Katsuki eating dinner. He arrived home after fencing and was not rushing to tell his father the news. Ever since the passing of his equally hot-headed mother, Katsuki barely saw his father. He assumed it was because he reminded him too much of Mitsuki. Instead, he dropped his stuff with his bodyguard and greeted his father's personal assistant. He liked Natalie, she was almost like a mother to him. "Hello, Katsuki. How was the first day?" she had asked him at dinner time. His father was still nowhere to be found. "It was okay," he sighed and stirred his chopsticks in his noodles. "I think I'm going to take this to my room." She opened her mouth to object, but closed it quickly. His father was locked in his design room. When Katsuki walked past with his bowl in hand, he thought for a moment about trying to go in. It was a futile thought, he hadn't seen his father since the last photo shoot. In his room he sat on the couch flipping through television channels. He landed on the United States news coverage. It was something Izuku used to watch with him. After his mother's death, Inko stopped bringing Izuku around. His father had banned them from the house, after he had gotten into a fight with the usually timid woman. He remembered his father used to be the quieter type himself. Masaru was adamant that he stopped being friends with Izuku. The blonde obliged, only wanting to make his father happy. The green-haired boy never accepted the separation, and Katsuki turned mean. It was harmless at first, but Katsuki developed a hatred for the boy. He couldn't quite understand why after everything he had done to him Izuku always came back. Izuku was weak, he had no spine, and Katsuki decided he was better off where he was. Above him. For some reason he left the channel playing. He watched the coverage of the American heroes as they zipped around fighting a villain. Izuku had always insisted the heroes had Miraculous. Katsuki insisted that some people were just born with abilities and a piece of jewelry couldn't give you powers. He tossed the remote on the table while his eyes stayed glued to the screen and it knocked against something. On his coffee table sat a wooden box. He leaned to look at it and assumed it was a gift from Natalie. Katsuki carefully opened it to see a thick silver ring. Then a flying creature with a head resembling a cat. What the F? Chapter 2, Don't wait for the tide just to dip both your feet in half of the items that were on Izuku's desk laid on the floor. He had thrown everything at the creature. The pile was made of books, pens, paper, and his pencil cup. The ladybug popped up through the books. Through them. What the hell are you? He shrieked, holding one of his textbooks up in defense. I'm a kwami. Will you let me explain? Izuku slowly lowered the book and pinched himself. It wasn't a dream. A part of him was wondering if he had finally gone crazy from Bakugou bullying him. The bug flew over and gestured at the earrings that he was holding. Those earrings are the Miraculous of the ladybug. Izuku's eyes widened and he screamed with excitement. He reached inside the box and studied the earrings carefully. The kwami simply floated in the air while he was practically jumping. The freckled boy took out his silver studs that he usually wore and clicked the earrings on. When you say the magic words, you will get the ability to take down the villain that's running amok, Tiki said, wiggling in the air to bring attention to herself. Izuku stopped. Wait, what? Haven't you looked outside? The kwami asked. The green-haired boy tripped over his feet and climbed the ladder up to his rooftop. That was when he noticed the police cars speeding down the streets towards where there was a loud explosion. Whoa, Izuku said, staring at his hands, and then he looked up at Tiki. This isn't my thing. I've always wanted to be a hero, but I don't think I can do this. He climbed back down the ladder with Tiki following behind him. You don't understand. You're the only one who can capture the akuma hidden on the villain, the little creature pleaded, and Izuku sighed. What's an aku? Actually forget it, I'm not doing this. I can think of a lot of other people who would be better at being a hero than me. Like Kaken. I can give you to him. If he was being honest with himself, Izuku didn't want to give the Miraculous up. He was terrified at the thought of having to deal with those explosions, and he knew that there were people probably better suited for the job than himself. Izuku stood in front of his mirror and looked back into his own eyes. He knew what he had to do. What are the words? Tiki squeaked in response. Tiki, spots on. Izuku stared at the kwami and said the magic words. Particles of pink light crept up on him as Tiki flew into his earrings. He watched as a red spotted suit formed along his arms and legs. A mask laid across his nose and his green curls were slightly fluffier than before. Finally hanging on his waist like a belt laid a yo-yo. Tiki. He called out, and as he assumed the kwami was nowhere to be found. Izuku gazed at himself in the mirror, twisting and turning to look at all angles. I guess I have to do this alone. Izuku flicked on the television to see if there was any news coverage of the villain. It was a seemingly normal-looking girl covered in all black except for her head. She was creating items from her suit. Izuku paled when he saw her pull out a rocket launcher. When the girl turned, she made eye contact with the helicopter filming her. She aimed the rocket and shot it. The screen went black. But he saw her face. It was Momo. Izuku quickly shot out of his room and onto the roof. He needed to hurry. He played with his yo-yo in his hand and swung it out. Far in the distance it locked onto something. The freckled boy tugged his wrist expecting the yo-yo to come back to him. Instead he was yanked forward off the roof towards where he had hooked the end. With a scream he was flying through the air past where he had latched to. If Izuku wasn't flailing his arms like a dying chicken he would have smacked himself. He finally got the courage to open his eyes and look down at what he was going to hit. Which would be the cause of his early demise. His eyes locked onto a pair of red ones. There was a blonde tiptoeing along a metal pole between two low roofs. The boy's eyes widened as Izuku crashed straight into him. They both fell off the pole and plummeted to the ground. Right before their heads were smashed into nothing, Izuku's yo-yo caught the end of the pole and they were suspended mid-air. Tied together. Nice of you to drop in. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, Izuku mumbled. He was very close to the other boy and felt his cheeks heating up. While still mumbling apologies, he tugged on his yo-yo to let them both down. The yo-yo and the metal pole came crashing down onto the blonde's head. So you're the partner my Kwame told me about, he said, rubbing where the items had landed on him. Izuku finally looked at him. He was wearing a black leather suit with combat boots. At his neck was a shiny yellow bell and he had 2 leather cat ears sticking out the top of his head. He latched his metal bar to the back of his belt, which had a long end piece that dropped down like a tail. I'm Cat Noir. Yeah, Cat Noir. And you? Cat Noir stared at him expectantly. Izuku hadn't thought of a name. His face, which was already red enough, turned the color of his suit. His first day of being a hero and he didn't have a hero name. Their heads both whipped to the side when a loud boom echoed through the streets. The cat hero grabbed his pole and extended it. In a graceful motion he vaulted on top of a roof. Where are you going? Izuku called out. To save Paris. Izuku sighed in defeat and shot his yo-yo up to follow. When Izuku arrived, Cat Noir was fighting the villain at a familiar park. Izuku stood on a nearby rooftop to take in the scene in front of him. His eyes caught on a head of bright pink hair and noticed one of the girls from his class was in the park, Mina. She was there with a few others, including Todoroki, who was standing protectively in front of the group. Momo had Mineta caught inside of a net and hoisted up a tree. Her arms were adorned with metal gauntlets that shot out beams at Cat Noir every time he got close. Could really use some help right now, partner. He called out seemingly to no one as Izuku was positive he hadn't been seen yet. One of Momo's blasts went sideways and it shot at Todoroki and the group. Cat Noir threw his pole like a dart and it intercepted the blast. He couldn't retrieve it as it skid across the stone away from him. She grabbed him by the collar and pinned him to the ground. Izuku noticed her reach for the ring that was on his finger. Todoroki seemed to have noticed Izuku and he shouted out, "What are you waiting for, Red Bug? We need you." Izuku swallowed and he looked between Todoroki and Cat Noir, who was wiggling angrily on the ground under Momo's tight grip. Izuku wasn't fit to be a hero, that's what he'd been told his entire life. When Bakugou would make fun of him for thinking that they were real, or wishing to be like the American heroes. Or when his mom would just wish for him to focus on his studies instead of making costumes. But was he not meant to be a hero? Or were people just telling him that? He planted both feet and pulled his yo-yo. With a leap of faith he jumped off the roof and swung towards Momo. Izuku landed a powerful kick to her side, she lost grip of Cat Noir's ring and tumbled off of him. Momo recovered quickly and rolled back onto her feet. Momo! Don't do this! Mina called out. For only a second the villain glanced at her as she pulled out a katana from her forearm. My name isn't Momo. It's Creaty. With that the villain charged at the 2 animal heroes. Izuku dodged to the side and pulled Cat Noir with him. Thanks for showing up, handsome, he said with a wink, thought you stood me up. Izuku rolled his eyes at the mindless flirting. Creaty took the opportunity of them talking to start to make something big. Cat Noir took a step to go and stop her and Izuku grabbed him by his tail to pull him back. She makes stuff using the material of her clothing. It's covering her entire body, Izuku frowned, wondering why, and his mind flashed to what had happened earlier in the day. Then he shook his head, there was no way that Mineta had been the cause of this. If we can cover her up somehow she won't have access to the material. Or we could just get rid of the material. That would leave her completely exposed. Izuku exclaimed and then his eyes widened seeing what Momo was creating. It was a bomb. I don't care how we do it, Spots. I just don't feel like getting blown up. Cat Noir yelled and stared at his hand. I say we use our powers. Cataclysm. With a shout his hand radiated black and he waved it in front of Izuku's face. Wow, Izuku mocked, eyeing the bomb nervously. Apparently I can destroy whatever I touch, he said, motioning to touch the trash can beside them. The freckled boy stopped him and explained what they were going to do. He sighed loudly after explaining and realizing the bomb was almost completely out of her torso. They both nodded to each other and Izuku called out his own ability that Cat Noir had told him about. Lucky Charm. Down fell a red and black spotted tarp and he sighed in relief that he didn't need to find a blanket for his plan. Then they were in action. Izuku shot out his yo-yo and it wrapped around Creaty, pulling her forward as the bomb exited her body. Cat Noir jumped on it and slammed his hand around it. The bomb crumbled into ash and Momo screamed. Seeing she was about to break the yo-yo around her, Izuku called it back. From her hands she spawned small blades that she flung in Izuku's direction. He held up the blanket in front of himself as a reflex and the blades bounced off to land in the grass. Cat Noir ran behind him and they traded off the blanket. Momo. This isn't what you want. Izuku yelled while she came at him with another long sword. She sliced down aggressively and the green-haired boy shivered at the fact that if he didn't dodge he would have been split down the middle. I don't even know you. Izuku frowned and then realized that he was in a suit. Momentarily his mind drifted to wondering whether the theories he used to have about quantum masking were true. Momo wrestled him to the ground, the sword long gone. Izuku looked over her shoulder to see Cat Noir behind them. Izuku pushed upwards to create space between the two of them and her eyes widened in shock as the tarp was wrapped around her waist. Cat Noir tugged her up and before she could get free Izuku wrapped his yo-yo around her body to pin her wrists in. We need to search for the Akuma. Creaty was rendered immobilized with the tarp keeping her torso covered and her legs together. The only place she could still make stuff was from her hands and arms, but they were pinned masterfully to her sides. The two heroes searched her and Izuku noticed a bracelet around one of her arms. He slipped it off her wrist and snapped the flimsy string. A purple substance crawled up Momo and she was returned back to normal wearing her school uniform. From the bracelet flew a butterfly in the same purple. Izuku watched it fly into the sky. They unraveled her and she stared up at them with tear-filled eyes. The net that was holding my netta fizzled away and he dropped head first onto the ground. We did it, handsome, Cat Noir winked. He held out his hand for a fist pump lazily. PND it. They both said and knocked their fists together. Izuku noticed his ring was blinking loudly. You should go. We have to keep our identities a secret. He nodded with a salute. I'm glad I got you Misterbug thing. I don't know if I could do this job while putting up with a useless nerd. The cat hero vaulted a roof and he disappeared from Izuku's view. He laughed to himself quietly. Cat Noir reminded him of a nicer version of Bakugou. His attention was brought to Momo after his partner left. Are you alright? Yes, that boy just said some stuff to me and I couldn't get it out of my head. Suddenly I'm here. She stopped herself and looked away. I should have better control of my emotions. Momo, don't say that. Wait, how do you know my name? Izuku began to stammer and was quickly interrupted by Todoroki who approached them with Mina. Mina was holding out her phone that had a neon pink phone case and an alien pop socket. Thank you for saving us, Todoroki. Said with a bow. Izuku was surprised with what he said next. He had assumed the boy was very calm and collected. Not one to go on rambling, like Izuku usually did. Where'd you get your powers from? What's your name? Did you get stung by a radioactive ladybug? Do you know that other hero? Izuku turned around blushing at the assault of questions. Todoroki had such an admiring look on his face while he was asking. Izuku was slightly nervous of Mina's phone being on him. He knew she had quite the social media following. He decided to answer only one question. Izuku readied his yo-yo and thought about what Cat Noir had called him. Mr. Bug. Call me Mr. Bug. Chapter 3, now I look dumb and you look mean, Mr. Bug, Katsuki repeated to himself, dribbling a basketball on the floor. On his television played the news. It was a video taken by a voice he recognized. Plag was interesting, to say the least. He was loud, annoying, and ate a ridiculous amount of cheese. Katsuki's phone had been blowing up after the attack while Mina rambled on about how she had been right there to see it. He wasn't pleased to be in their group chat. They had only known each other for a day. Not to mention they stupidly named it Baku Squad. Kirishima had called him Baku Bro far too many times for his liking. Izuku wasn't in the chat. Which was perfectly fine, he didn't want him there. But, it did feel a little weird to be having conversations without the curly-haired boy always behind him. Maybe he was finally taking the hint that Katsuki didn't need him. When Katsuki got home by vaulting through his window he heard crashing from his father's study. His father, while much more angry than he was before his mother's death, never was aggressive. The blonde didn't care to ask about it however when Natalie came to his room to check on him. He asked for some cheese and requested they order a large supply of camembert. She stared at him funny, but it was to keep the cat happy. "You both have lame names," the cat-like creature said. "Shut the F up," Katsuki snapped. He knew it wasn't that creative, but he panicked seeing Mr. Bug. "I'm just saying I've seen some pretty creative names in my time. I've also seen much nicer holders." Katsuki glared at him and shot the basketball into the net. "I'm nice enough. I've got to get ready for school soon." "Where are you going to go?" "Well, I looked through your closet and saw all your big pants with pockets. So I'll hide in there." Katsuki rolled his eyes and responded, "I have a school uniform. Still got pockets." "Hey Todoroki, how would you feel being a hero?" Izuku asked, fiddling with his earrings. "I think I would be good at it, Midoriya. I have a very logical brain." Izuku smiled remembering how his friend had looked so excited to talk to Mr. Bug. That morning Mr. Aizawa had assigned them some random task and most of the class ignored it to talk to Momo. She looked utterly embarrassed at everyone bringing up what had happened. Izuku rose to his feet and made his way over to her. "Guys, don't crowd her. She already said she doesn't know what happened. The heroes saved the day anyways." Everyone ignored him and continued to bombard her with questions. Izuku even caught a few pointed insults. He suddenly felt a presence behind him and turned his neck slightly to see Bakugou. "F nerd. Speak up or no one's going to listen to you," Bakugou said with an eye roll and then raised his voice, "Get the F away from her. You F vultures." "Bakugou, Langua, actually I don't care," Aizawa said, looking up from his book and standing up to get in his sleeping bag. "I do." Ida shouted from his seat. The class all looked at Ida and decided to go back to their seats. Momo, who was extremely tense, relaxed and she stared down at her textbook. Tsu, who sat next to her, patted her on the back and nodded at Izuku gratefully. "Thank you, Midoriya and Bakugou," she whispered. Bakugou clicked his tongue and returned to his seat where Kirishima began to talk about manliness to him. Izuku smiled and returned to his seat. "I think you would be a good hero too, Midoriya." Izuku grinned wider. His multicolored friend didn't pick up on his change and they continued to work on their assignment. Time flew by quickly and Todoroki and Izuku had already planned what they were going to do for the task. Eventually it was time for them to head to their lockers and change classes. When they entered the locker room Momo shrieked. Izuku entered the room second and his eyes went wide at the sight in front of him. Taped to the lockers, benches and even the entry doors were all pictures of Momo. They were just pictures of her in cars, but for how young they were the dresses she was wearing were slightly concerning. The freckled boy rested a hand on her shoulder and she wrenched away from him with tears streaming down her usually poised face. She tore the photos off her locker and ripped the door open. Inside more photos fell out onto the floor. Their class was in shock as they watched the seemingly perfect girl break in front of them all. Mineta and Kaminari chuckled. Until she stared at us and even Kaminari was quiet. You, she growled, and Mineta stared at her innocently. What is wrong with you? Isn't it enough that you humiliated me? Made me a villain? Izuku froze. What exactly did Momo mean by that? Momo, I'm so sorry, Kaminari said, guilt painted on his face. I wouldn't have helped him if I knew. I'm sorry. She processed his apology and her figure enlarged by rage shrunk until she almost seemed like she was caving into herself. It's okay, she said with a blink as if realizing her outburst was happening in front of everyone. Her rage was quickly replaced by shame. I'm sorry everyone. No you're not. The class turned to look at Bakugou who had his fists balled up. The only person who should be sorry here is the pervert. Kaken, Izuku said, reaching out a hand which was slapped away. No. I know that I can't be talking about rights and wrongs. But this, he said and pointed towards the photos, this is wrong. I'm so tired of no one having backbone. Momo stared at him, tears pooled in her eyes once again. She reached for the photos stuffed in her locker and let them all fall to the floor. She held on in her hand and faced it towards the class. Is this all you see? Izuku was going to throw up. It showed her sitting on the hood of a car in a long red dress with a plunging neckline. Mineta was no longer smiling. Everyone wore a disturbed look on their face. She blinked down at the photo and then at everyone else. I'm a really good engineer, you know. He got in my head and told me I could make whatever I wanted. My body didn't have to be seen. Momo, a girl with purple headphones around her neck said, Jairu. That's not all I see. That's not all that Midoriya saw when he helped you this morning. Not who Mina saw when she called out for you yesterday. Not what those heroes saw when they saved you. Momo dropped the photo to the ground and it slowly fluttered through the air. Her gaze landed on Mineta and then looked back to Jairu. I really wish I believed you. She walked out of the room, probably out of the whole building. No one stopped her. Izuku felt his chest hurt as he realized he should have chased after her. His brain was on other things. She had mentioned it almost made Izuku's heart stop beating. There was someone behind her transformation. Clean this the up, Bakugou said as he shoved Mineta towards the lockers. I better not see a single one or you'll get kicked out of here faster than you can make a pervy comment. The rest of the day went quietly. Mineta cleaned the lockers and not even Kaminari spoke to him. Kirishima was jittery the entire day worrying about Momo and Jairu came back from the washroom with her eyes red from tears. Izuku walked with Todoroki from his classes and the heterochromatic boy was silent, no deadpan comments or misunderstood jokes. In science class Izuku sat beside Bakugou, who scribbled his notes down angrily, breaking the lead on his pencil. Izuku himself wasn't even paying attention. His mind wandered to the fight with Creaty. It felt wrong to even think of her as Momo. She wasn't a villain, she was one of the most heroic people that Izuku had ever met. To be under such pressure and not be a broken mess every day. She was very strong. Izuku stared at Bakugou who was no longer clenching his jaw aggressively and he simply looked down at his page not writing anything. If anything Momo should have been more like Bakugou. He was, like her, a model for his father. His face was everywhere. If their school didn't have such high-class people in it already Izuku was sure everyone would be all over him. Out of everyone there, Izuku was plain. Not broke, not rich. Just there. Even Uraraka, who had got in on scholarship, had more to give because at least she got in for her intelligence. Why are you staring at me, Deku? Izuku flushed and dropped his pencil on the floor. I'm sorry Kaken. I was just zoning out. I wasn't staring at you. I swear. Well, I was. But, I wasn't staring at you. I was staring in your direction. Why do you ramble so much? Bakugou said and looked at Izuku without moving his head. Izuku felt a flush creep up his cheeks as he stared at the blonde. The afternoon sun was hitting his ash-blonde hair just right and it turned golden at the tips. Bakugou's eyes were a whole other story. The light reflected within them causing them to flash a million different shades of jewel red. "Sorry," Izuku said and flipped open his notebook. When he looked at the board he squeaked realizing how much he had to copy down and that their teacher, Mr. Yamada, was about to erase everything. Bakugou slid his notebook over. "Just use mine." Izuku gaped at him. "I just don't want to hear you have your fifth mental breakdown of the day," Bakugou said and turned away from Izuku. The green-haired boy looked over the notes and was surprised to see how even though the blonde wrote aggressively his handwriting was neat. He had even color-coded his information and it was all sorted neatly. "You sure I'm the nerd, Kaken?" Izuku laughed and then clamped a hand to his mouth speedily. Bakugou slowly dragged his eyes to meet Izuku's, now he was staring directly towards the light and the freckled boy was convinced he had stopped breathing. "Yeah, you're the nerd, Deku," he breathed, shaking his head. Izuku's heart was no longer beating properly. Was Bakugou being nice? "Just because I'm good at school doesn't mean I'm an insufferable dork like you." There was the Bakugou that Izuku knew. Even though the words were insulting, Izuku couldn't help but be hung up on the way they were said. In such a soft tone. Instead of crying or whining, Izuku simply laughed, which earned him a shocked look from Bakugou. He copied his notes efficiently and slid the book back with a hum. Inside, the green-haired boy was screaming with happiness. His internal screams were interrupted with real ones. Mineta let out a shrill scream as the wall of the classroom burst through and he was grabbed by a robotic arm. Izuku looked up to see a giant robot with Momo sitting inside the head, covered in the black fabric. She wrapped the other hand around Kaminari and they were pulled out of the classroom. Everyone gathered around the hole she had made to see her walking down the street with them. Izuku couldn't breathe. He didn't understand. He had done everything right. Bakugou had run out of the room with most of his classmates. Tiki slipped out of his pocket and hid herself in his curly hair. "Did you not capture the Akuma?" "I broke the bracelet and a butterfly came out," Izuku replied. "You have to catch it with your yo-yo. Then you take your lucky charm and say, 'Miraculous Ladybug,' to fix everything to how it was before." I didn't do any of that. "Tiki, I failed, I'm so sorry." "It's fine, Izuku," she reassured, "you just have to go and fix it before anyone gets hurt." "No, Tiki. I'm not going to fix anything." Before she could protest, Izuku reached up to his ears and took out his earrings. He noticed Todoroki trying to calm down Jairu and get her out of the classroom. Todoroki would be a better hero than him. He could be the partner Cat Noir needed, the hero the world needed. Walking up behind him, Izuku slipped the earrings into a pocket of his bag. "Todoroki." Mina called from the door. "We have to go help." Izuku swallowed at the idea of his classmates going to fight a supervillain. Guilt crept up on him as he realized how selfish giving up the earrings actually was. Putting someone in the position to make mistakes like he had. But Todoroki wouldn't make mistakes. Neither would Cat Noir. He believed in his friends. The group shuffled out of the classroom. Izuku stayed with Jairu while the other two ran together. "I'll take you to the train. So you can get home." Jairu nodded, she was shaking. Izuku didn't know if she was scared of Momo or scared for Momo. The two walked flinching every so often when a loud boom sounded. Izuku swore he saw the cat hero vaulting over a nearby building, but blamed it on a trick of the light. He actually liked Cat Noir on their first meeting. He might have been a flirty, action, first kind of guy, but Izuku liked being around people different from him. When they made it to the final corner before the subway station, Izuku wasn't prepared for the sight in front of him. Todoroki was pinned by a car that had been thrown vertically. Izuku then noticed he was being hit by the car, but was pinned by Cat Noir's pole, keeping the full weight of it from landing on him. His bag was laying on the ground. "Jairu, go get somewhere safe." "What about you?" The face Izuku gave her silenced her and she ran down the stairs to the train. Further down the street Cat Noir was fighting. He had pouring down his forehead and he looked like he was losing without his. Mina was struggling to get Todoroki out from under the car. The shouts of people running, Mina crying as she tried to free Todoroki, who looked like he was unconscious, Cat Noir using everything around him to fight Creaty. She looked like she was barely breaking a sweat and she still had Kaminari and Mineta grasping tightly. Izuku glared at Todoroki's red and white bag. He ran over and rummaged through for the earrings. He just had to be Misterbug one more time. One more time to save Paris. The earrings clicked into place like they knew they were meant to be there. Tiki swirled out with a shocked look on her face. Aizu, the Kwami was interrupted by the green-haired boy whispering, "Tiki. Spots on." Chapter 4 Either way, we're not alone, I'll find a new place to be from Izuku sprinted towards Mina and Todoroki. "Mr. Bug!" she exclaimed in relief as Izuku braced his arm against the car to prepare to move it. "My friend Todoroki got caught behind and he's unconscious. I'm Ashido, or actually Mina. Everyone calls me Mina. SHT this is not time for my rambling. Mina, step back. I'm about to lift the car, and I need you to grab him," Izuku grunted as he forced his strength to move the vehicle off of Todoroki. He normally wouldn't even think about trying to free him, but Izuku had studied the Miraculous. They gave the wearer heavily increased strength and stamina. As the car shifted off, Cat Noir's metal pole clattered to the ground and Izuku kicked it away. He groaned at the heavy weight, Mina carried her bicolored friend out of the way and Izuku dropped the car with a thud. "My back is going to be destroyed tomorrow," Izuku said and scrunched his nose, "Get to safety. Cat Noir and I have got this." He reached down for Cat Noir's weapon and ran into the fight. "Cat!" he called. The blonde who was struggling as Creaty pushed against him whipped his head over. He smirked as Izuku tossed his weapon back to him. With a click the pole extended sending the hero backwards. Creaty's robot stumbled slightly, almost losing her grip on Mineta completely. "Seems like you're always late, handsome." "I like to make an entrance," Izuku replied with a wink and unhooked the yo-yo from his belt. Creaty turned and Izuku locked eyes with her. She wore an uncanny smile on her face as a circle on the robotic chest began to flare to life. A thick laser struck the ground where Cat Noir had been standing, that was until Izuku jumped on him. They rolled out of the way while coughing from all the smoke the blast had created. Izuku, not quite having the strength to get to his feet, propped himself up on his hands. He looked down to see Cat Noir staring up at him. Even bloodied the hero was quite attractive. "We keep meeting like this." Izuku rolled off of him and crawled to his feet. "Can you not flirt until after the city is saved, Cat?" "Sure, Spots." The dust had finally settled and they both realized that Creaty was no longer there. Police cars whipped past them on the street. The heroes both looked to each other and launched over the rooftops in the direction they were going. In the distance they could see Creaty on top of the Eiffel Tower. 3 helicopters surrounded her. Izuku almost laughed thinking the police would know better, after what had happened last time. On the ground were tens of police cars and many officers. The two heroes swung onto the scene and landed on the hood of one of the cars with a thud. The chief held up a megaphone. His nameplate read, "Mineta." That was a surprise for Izuku. He wondered how exactly a roach like Mineta had a police chief for his father. "Give me back my son." Creaty waved the arm with Mineta in it causing him to start sobbing. In a few minutes both heroes were positive the boy was going to wet his pants. "You want him? Okay." She wound her arm back and threw the boy. He came barreling towards the ground. Izuku knew that Momo was being possessed by something, but if she killed someone, the aftermath would be devastating no matter what the influence was. Izuku shot out his yo-yo and pulled the boy in. Realizing he was cradling Mineta in his arms he handed the pervert to his father who shed a single tear. Cat Noir scoffed at the moment like he was about to cough out a hairball. "He's secure. We're free to attack. Izuku and Cat Noir whipped their heads towards the chief. Whoa, what? Cat Noir was gobsmacked. There's another boy up there. Yeah, you could kill him. You could kill her. Izuku protested, glaring at an officer who raised his gun far too high for his liking. That's really sweet and all, but let the pros handle it. You already messed up once. Izuku's heart dropped, his hands instinctively went to his earrings. Cat Noir laid a hand on his shoulder. His crimson eyes crinkled as he smiled. Listen. We didn't know what we were doing then. We do now. That boy wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you, and they're not going to win if it's not for us. I thought you weren't a useless nerd, so stop thinking like one. His raspy voice sounded less reassuring and more like a threat, but the green-haired boy nodded nonetheless. Their attention was brought to Creaty as her robotic armor creaked loudly and she coughed from inside the head. Momo. Kaminari shouted concernedly, loud enough it could be heard from where the heroes were standing. The robot doubled over and fell backwards. Izuku flinched, hoping Kaminari was alright. Out from Creaty came hundreds of purple moths, all flying together to take the form of a human head. The police chief's jaw was open in shock and his hand was still in the air waiting to give the command to his forces. People of Paris, the voice spoke, deep and familiar, I am Hawk Moth. Misterbug, Cat Noir, give me the ladybug earrings and the cat ring now. You've done enough damage to these innocent people. Izuku clicked his tongue and smiled sweetly. A slow clap sounded as he brought his hands together lazily. Cat Noir made no move towards him. Nice speech, Hawk Moth. Did you practice that one in front of the mirror? Let's not try and turn the tables here. Without you none of these innocent children would be experiencing this. Let me make myself very clear. We will find you. And you will hand us your Miraculous. Izuku took off running towards the tower, spinning his yo-yo behind him. He flung himself into the air and spun his yo-yo, catching all the moths inside of it. Hawk Moth yelled in protest. But it was futile as the moths dispersed or were captured. The people of Paris stared up at Izuku as he stood on the top of the Eiffel Tower. Let me make this promise to you. He said, not raising his voice, but it carried with more authority than the mayor himself, no matter who comes to harm you. Cat Noir and I will do everything in our power to keep you all safe. Izuku clicked open his yo-yo and held it to the sky. Out shot the hundreds of moths. Instead of being purple and infected, they were pure white butterflies. Katsuki could only look at Misterbug with utmost awe. There were not many people in his life he felt deserved his respect. Let alone admiration. But watching the green-haired hero stand in front of the entire city and promise to protect them, his heart ached. He whispered to the air, whoever he is behind that mask. I love that boy. Something shifted behind Misterbug and Katsuki clicked out his pole to join his partner on the Eiffel Tower. Nice speech, handsome, Katsuki said, then added, mocking his earlier statement playfully, you practiced that one in the mirror. When Plag had explained the whole reason why he had the Miraculous and everything he was going to need to do it was a no-brainer. Even back when he and Izuku were kids and they talked about becoming heroes, Katsuki was always the stronger one. The faster one, the smarter one. In another life he would have loved to be a hero, and he was glad he was living it out in this one. The leather cat suit and ears wasn't exactly what he was imagining. He had been hoping for something more explosive. It seemed that, like Izuku used to theorize, the suit had quantum masking. Which meant he was free to be whoever he wanted to be. Katsuki definitely wished their identities didn't have to be a secret. Even though he wasn't friends with Izuku anymore, it didn't mean he didn't want to tell the other boy that all of their theories were true. It was better this way. He got to be Cat Noir, the flirty outgoing hero. He didn't have to lash out, didn't have to be angry or push people away. After being around Misterbug more and more, all he wanted was to pull the spotted hero in and hold him there forever. It wasn't like it was romantic love or anything. He just had admiration for the other and a flirty personality deep down that he never let out. Creaty, with Kaminari safely in hand, pushed the suit back to a standing position. She popped open the area she was contained in and started to pull knives out of her forearms. The robotic arm made a sharp movement and Kaminari wailed. "Okay, Red," Katsuki said, "how are you going to solve this one?" Misterbug jumped to the side dodging a knife thrown while he had his brows furrowed thinking. "Lucky charm. A smoke machine," Katsuki said, grabbing it as he flipped over another attack. "Battery operated." Misterbug looked around like he could see something no one else could. His eyes flicked to the machine, Creaty's foot and finally Katsuki himself. "Plan?" Katsuki asked, and Misterbug pulled them behind a beam to explain. As they went to turn the corner a blast grazed the blonde's face. He frowned and whipped out his bar to double in size. With a yell the cat hero charged at the villain, to only be thrown by her free hand and pinned under the robotic leg. A clang of metal hitting metal was all Misterbug needed to know they had succeeded. His partner wriggled and groaned in fake pain. The smoke machine was set off and thick clouds of white smoke blocked the view of Katsuki. He had shot his bar out to keep the foot from crushing him. It was still taking some of his strength to keep the bar from collapsing. Through the misty fog he made out the red outline of Misterbug swinging his yo-yo at Creaty who, with her body in the open instead of being in the mech, grabbed the string and pulled the hero in. Her robot wrapped its free hand around the hero. She leaned out to reach her hand for Misterbug's earrings. "Cat!" Katsuki's partner yelled. Their plan was going to work. It had to. If it didn't, Katsuki didn't want to think about what Hawk Moth was going to do with their Miraculous. He extended his bar further, still covered by the smoke, to lay between two poles and it stayed strong mimicking him under her foot. Silent on light toes he reached for the back of the suit and swung himself onto the top. He made eye contact with Misterbug, his face itself was turned away from the villain and she had one earring in her hand. His suit was slowly peeling away. As quiet as he could be, Katsuki wrapped a hand around Creaty's wrist and found the bracelet. She almost dropped the earring shock. "What?" Katsuki ripped the bracelet off her wrist and the entire suit began to crumble. Momo, Misterbug, Kaminari and Katsuki all fell towards the tower. It wasn't a deathly drop, but Momo and Kaminari were already shaken up enough. Misterbug reached for his earring and clicked it back into place, then shot out his yo-yo to catch the moth. His mask formed once again and his identity was protected. He pulled Momo to his chest as they fell and shot his yo-yo up to allow them for a slow descent. Katsuki stretched himself into a dive in the air and landed with a roll. He pushed himself to his knees and Kaminari landed safely in his arms. "Oh my god, thank you," he looked up with bright yellow eyes. Katsuki tried his best to smile and dumped Kaminari onto the floor. "Okay, Les, thank you." Misterbug knelt cradling Momo in his arms attempting to calm her down and reassuring her she didn't hurt anyone. Kaminari recovered from being dumped on the floor and ran over to her apologizing profusely. "Listen, I can be an idiot, sometimes. Well, a lot. But I should have known when my Netta asked me to do something it was going to be pervy. I'm just a flirty guy, I'm not like him. I'm really sorry, Momo." He stayed in a bow while rambling on an apology. Misterbug allowed the electric-haired boy to continue to talk to Momo and he took his place beside Katsuki. "You impressed, Cat?" Katsuki had been staring at him ever since they had landed. Misterbug clicked his yo-yo and sent a singular white butterfly into the sky. Bye, little butterfly." Katsuki's partner held the smoke machine. He threw it up into the air and exclaimed, "Miraculous ladybug." All around them thousands of magical ladybugs zipped around. They fixed all the damage that Creaty had made to the surrounding area. "What are they?" Katsuki said awestruck as he watched the glittering magic repair everything. A few flew past him and he held out his arm for them to graze him as they passed. "They're appealing," Misterbug replied as he watched the ladybugs fly in one large pillar up into the sky before dispersing everywhere. Katsuki held out a hand for a fist bump and they connected with a smile. Job well done, Spots. Though with that plan you are starting to convince me you're kind of a dork. Mr. Bug laid his hands on his hips. One of us has to have a plan, Cat. Also, are you ever going to call me by my name? Maybe one day, handsome. With a wave Katsuki retrieved his pole and jumped off the tower. He stuck his stick in the ground and propelled himself forwards, wondering if Mr. Bug was still looking at him. Somewhere hidden, Hawk Moth yelled in frustration. The window to his lair closed with a finite thud and he was left alone in the dark with his moths. He let one fall on his finger and followed with his eyes after it flew away. With a defeated sight he held his locket and clicked it open. Staring at the photo inside, the villain clenched his jaw and spoke to the open space. Threatening and raw with rage. Mr. Bug. Cat Noir. I'm going to get your Miraculous. I'm going to bring her back. Chapter 5, I'm tired of giving more than I receive. Bakugou had been acting differently. Izuku noticed that he helped his classmates more. Didn't completely shove away Kirishima's affection and his nicknames were getting less and less insulting. Izuku and Todoroki had beaten his score on their assignment and the blonde didn't even scream. He simply mumbled, "Shut up nerd," and moved on checking his feedback. In science class they had little conversations and Izuku was making his own group of friends. He decided to keep the Miraculous after saving the city. He had made a promise after all. They had fought a few villains since the first time. Mostly random people who were feeling negative and suddenly they ended up under the control of Hawk Moth. One of the villains ended up being his teacher, Mr. Yamada, who got the ability to change the volume of his voice. Life was going pretty good for the freckled boy. He sat on the edge of a rooftop swinging his feet beside Cat Noir. They had set up these nighttime patrols, just to protect the city when there wasn't as much law enforcement around. Cat Noir swung his belt tail in his hand and scooted closer to Izuku. "So, I've been thinking. Must have been really hard for you," Izuku mused with a laugh. When he was with his partner it was like a weight was lifted off his chest. He wasn't stammering or nervous, he was logical and his mind was surprisingly quiet. It was a complete switch from the blubbering mess he was talking to Bakugou. "Zip it, Spots," Cat Noir replied with a playful eye roll. "Seriously though. After what all the victims have said about Hawk Moth I think I figured out how he gets them." Izuku swung his legs off from the ledge of the roof and crossed them. "How's that?" He turned to face Cat Noir who looked him up and down before continuing. "Well, let's use the first girl as an example. She said that boy had been bothering her. Hawk Moth got in her head and promised her things. It sounds like he feeds on negative emotions and makes the victim promises to fix them," Cat Noir said, "and his payment is miraculous. For a reason we don't know." Izuku with his legs still crossed leaned back to lay on the slanted roof while looking up at the stars. "That's honestly a great theory. I'm impressed, Cat. I wish whoever gave us the Miraculous could help." "Wait," Cat Noir said carefully, "I don't know if this is a question I'm allowed to ask, but how did you get yours?" "I just found mine on my coffee table." "It was on my desk," Izuku responded, propping his head up with an arm to look at the other hero. "I don't know how it got there. Maybe the Kwamis could help. I'll ask Plag when I get home." "Hey, what's your Kwami's name?" "Tiki." "That's nice. I wonder if they know each other." Izuku raised his eyebrows playing with the question in his brain. "I mean I would assume so. What if through history there's been other Misterbugs and Cat Noirs? I wonder if they fall in love every time," Cat Noir said leaning in with a wink. "But seriously though, Plag told me that he'd had way nicer holders. Which means, there were others like us." Izuku exclaimed at the thought. Obviously through his studying he knew that there were many miraculous holders over the time. With the miraculous themselves originating from ancient China. But to think that there were other people who used to be in their shoes. It sent Izuku's mind into a frenzy of questions. I'll have to do some more research about the Miraculous, then, Izuku thought out loud. Definitely. They're opening a new Ancient Egypt exhibit, if you want to check that out someday on patrol. We could make it a date, handsome. Nice try, cat. The cat hero hummed amused in response and pulled his knees to his chest. Cars drove in the street down below, catching the light from the lampposts. Their nighttime patrols usually ended with them like this. There wasn't much crime in their area. Ever since the hero duo had debuted, crime slowly disappeared. Or they were getting hidden better. Izuku didn't know why they still bothered with the patrol. But, he felt wrong knowing he only saw Cat Noir when they were fighting a villain. So the patrol was more like a friendly outing for them to bond, rather than something serious. He felt something on his arm and looked down to see Cat Noir laying against him. His eyelashes fanned the area of his mask and the energetic cat looked very peaceful. Izuku rested his own head on top of his partner's as orange light covered them both. He brushed Cat Noir's golden hair off his forehead and smiled. The sun rose, basking the city of love in light. Bakugou hadn't shown up to school in 3 days. The blonde was very studious. He went to bed at 8:30 and took color-coded notes. It wasn't abnormal for the rich students to miss school. Momo had photo shoots and Todoroki was the son of the mayor. But Izuku had known his fiery ex-best friend for a very long time. He didn't like missing school. On the 4th day he walked in late. Mr. Aizawa opened his mouth to say something, but the glare Bakugou gave silenced even their scary teacher. He took his seat beside Kirishima and as attendance was being called out Izuku heard the red-haired boy speak, "Bakugou, where have you been? 3 days is a lot of school, man. You don't think I know that, shitty hair." Bakugou shouted in a raspy voice that sounded like it was tearing at his vocal cords. Mr. Aizawa reprimanded him and he muttered a few curses. He leaned to the side and Izuku saw his face. Under his eyes were slight dark circles and a red tinge like he had been crying a lot. Izuku shook his head. Bakugou Katsuki did not cry. His dark circles were more prominent than Izuku's and Izuku had spent a few nights on patrol getting no sleep. The blonde's already slouchy posture was even worse. His shoulders were dropped and his head hung low like it took too much energy for him to keep it upright. He kept blinking at the lights like they were bothering him. Todoroki, who was horrible at social cues, even noticed something was wrong and asked Izuku if he knew the reason. The entire morning everyone was on edge. Kaminari laughed a little quieter around his friend and Mina made the effort to look extra smiley. When the class left for lunch Kirishima attempted to walk with Bakugou who stayed in his seat, staring at his desk. The sharp-toothed boy locked eyes with Izuku pleadingly. "Todoroki, Uraraka, go without me," his friends looked at him with furrowed brows, "I'll catch up in a few minutes." The two shrugged on their backpacks and left the room with a final glance over their shoulders. Even Mr. Aizawa had left. "Kaken. What the F do you want?" Bakugou said, his hand balled into a fist at his desk. Izuku carefully approached and slid into the seat beside him. He was very confused. The blonde had been changing so much, he was starting to become kind. Well, as kind as Bakugou could be. "I'm sorry, but you're obviously not okay," Izuku replied, "I think you're freaking Kirishima out too." Bakugou turned his head with a set jaw. Izuku's eyes widened and he realized that what he was doing was a horrible idea. He didn't talk to the blonde like this, not anymore. He was completely prepared for what happened next. If anything, the freckled boy was surprised it didn't happen the minute he sat down. Bakugou grabbed him by his collar. "What the F is wrong with you, shitty Deku?" "Kaken, I am sorry," Izuku stammered and quickly stopped talking when the grip Bakugou had on his shirt tightened. "Stop apologizing. For F's sakes, I'm grabbing you right now and you're rambling on apologizing. What are you apologizing for, Deku?" Izuku was silent and he turned his head, not willing to make eye contact. With his other hand Bakugou wrenched his chin so their eyes met. Now you won't have speak. With all your rambling. I hate you so much, why can't you take a hint? I hate you so much. A furious tear fell down Izuku's face. Bakugou noticed them and his face went slack as if he realized what he had said. With a shove he sent Izuku off his chair onto the floor. The blonde slung his bag over his shoulder. Before fully stepping out of the room he turned back for a moment and whispered something. It was far too quiet and Izuku wasn't paying attention anyway. I hate you so much. Katsuki looked back at Izuku from the doorway. The boy was on the floor looking up at him with big green eyes. Katsuki couldn't stand to look at them. To see his eyes shine, not with joy like they usually did, but with tears. Before leaving he whispered, "Don't you understand, Zuku? I don't deserve your apologies. I can't be friends with you." He didn't bother to look at the green-haired boy to see if he had heard it. It didn't matter. Katsuki had gone too far, he just needed to be left alone. After the news he had got the past all came rushing back to him. When he entered the locker room to notice it was empty he slammed his fist against his locker. It made his anger 10 times worse. Knowing he was getting better. He actually enjoyed his conversations with Kiri, and Izuku would do stupid doodles on his notebook. He would smile at him in the morning, would give him the icing off of his cupcakes cause he didn't like the sweetness. Bakugou. The blonde froze. He saw a familiar pink afro from her peripherals. When he turned around she gasped involuntarily and clasped a hand over her mouth. Katsuki felt a single tear drop down his face onto his shirt. His eyes flicked from the small damp spot on his chest and back to her. She crossed the distance between them and dragged him into the gender-neutral washroom. Mina locked the door and turned to him. Katsuki wondered what exactly she saw when she looked at him. He knew that it must have been a shock to her. They hadn't known each other long, but Katsuki wasn't an idiot. He knew what his personality was and knew that anyone would have been shocked to find him in such a stare. Too lazy to care about his image he slid down the wall to sit on the floor with his head on his knees, crying. He knew he had never cried in front of any of his friends. Or anyone. When he thought about it more he hadn't cried since his mother's funeral. He flinched as Mina's hand rested on his shoulder and she knelt down beside him. What happened? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. My father's sending me to London next year. Mina let out a small breath and shifted to be beside him. She wrapped her arm around his shoulder and pulled Katsuki into her chest. He listened to the consistent beat of her heart as she traced circles on his shoulder. That was all Katsuki told her. He felt guilty because that wasn't the real reason he was crying at all. Sure, it had some part of it, but it was the reason behind him getting sent away. Masaru had found out Katsuki was talking to Izuku again. Which he wasn't allowed to do after his father had gotten in a fight with Inko. He gave his son 2 choices. Send Izuku away, or he could go to London to continue modeling. If his father had asked Katsuki a month ago the blonde might have taken the selfish option. He was a hero and Paris needed him. But, after seeing the freckled boy laughing with his friends and sharing his cupcakes he decided he couldn't take that away. After making the decision the blonde had thrown up. He broke almost everything that was breakable in his washroom and accidentally cut himself with the pieces. Natalie rushed in concerned and it had taken 2 days for him to convince her that he hadn't cut himself on purpose. Then he was allowed back at school. Is there a reason? Mina questioned. No, he lied. She stopped drawing circles on his arms. He noticed his breathing had gone back to normal and he was no longer crying. Mina took the bottom of her shirt and wiped his eyes. It's so much easier to wipe tears when people aren't wearing mascara, you know. He huffed out a scratchy laugh and looked up to see a sad smile on her face. Can we pretend this didn't happen, Raccoon Eyes? He added the nickname in hopes that she would realize he was feeling much better. The nickname was one of his stupider ones. Mina wore very dark eyeliner and her mascara was always smudged from accidentally rubbing her eyes. It contrasted her bright pink hair greatly. "You wound me, Sparky," she laughed with a shake of her head. Katsuki scowled at the use of one of his nicknames. He had originally given it to Kaminari because of the electric yellow of his hair. Mina decided it was better for the blonde because was always blowing up at everyone. But of course. "Don't be scared to come to me, yeah. You don't always have to be so angry." "I know," Katsuki said and shifted himself upright. He did know. It was part of the reason his tears were also mourning Cat Noir. He liked being that person more than being Katsuki Bakugou. Katsuki Bakugou shoved people away. He was a rotten, rage-filled, short-tempered bully. He didn't have the guts to tell the person he cared most about what was going on. So he pushed and pushed him away. But Izuku Midoriya latched on. He bounced back every time pretending like the insults didn't affect him. When he looked in the mirror, Katsuki was always told he was a carbon copy of his mother, with her fiery temper and uncontrollable blonde hair. But the more he looked, the more he realized that he could no longer see his mother in him. She was strong-willed, she would have never pushed Izuku away. Instead, the blonde was like his father, locking himself away and taking the rage out on everything around him. It was sickening to see what he had become. Katsuki stared into a pair of bright green eyes that he had dimmed and realized that there were only so many times Izuku could bounce back. For once the hatred and mourning in Izuku's eyes were not a reflection of his own. He had finally put too much tension on the rope and it had snapped. Chapter 6, Bittersweet, "'Cause I can't breathe inside your arms." Izuku was aware of the many mistakes he had made in his life. Why Bakugou had stopped being his friend was always a mystery. It kept him awake in the dead of night as he tossed and turned wondering what he had done. It had been such an immediate swch. He knew his mother had gotten into a fight with Bakugou's father, but he didn't think that was enough to tear apart their friendship. Izuku kept taking the blows and attempted to read between the lines and figure out what had happened. First, he thought it was because he was too close to the blonde. So he made sure to stay at a distance. Then, he thought it was his rambling. So whenever Bakugou was in his presence he talked less. He had spent so much time in a state of confusion. Izuku thought he was just being annoying. It had never crossed his mind that whatever pent-up resentment Bakugou was fostering to him had grown into something else. Hatred. Even after being bullied relentlessly by the blonde after the sudden swch up, he never hated him. Izuku understood him. During their fight in the classroom, all he could see was the pain that littered the other's face, contorting it into misconstrued anger. His eyes were opened when he was thrown to the cold hard ground. Kaken hated him. The green-haired boy's mind was doing backflips trying to understand what he had done. Deep down he knew there was no valid reason. He knew it was time to stop making excuses. His friend was never coming back. Something in the world had changed Katsuki Bakugou, and not for the better. Red. Cat Noir mumbled. Their patrol that night was suspiciously silent. Izuku's mind was other places and he noticed his partner wasn't fully present either. "You're mumbling." Izuku turned red in the face and snapped, "I know." Cat Noir's red eyes widened. Okay." The hero seemed unsure as he continued, "Listen, you don't seem like the kind of kid to curse. But, that sentence fell a little flat without a F in it. I'm guessing whatever SHT you have going on is bad. If it makes you feel better, I'm in the same boat." Izuku placed his hand on his forehead and pushed his curls out of his face. The cat hero was correct, even though Izuku wasn't one to swear. He knew exactly what the sentence would have sounded like from someone else's mouth. The green-haired hero hadn't sworn since Bakugou convinced him to, and he felt so guilty he ran to tell his mother. Thanks to that memory coming back to him, Izuku was thinking about Bakugou. Again. "You just cursed," Izuku pointed out and rolled his neck. "Yeah, I do curse. A lot. You didn't really seem like the type to, so I didn't want to make you uncomfortable or some SHT. Whatever, I'm used to it," Izuku replied. He hated the similarities between Cat Noir and his ex-best friend. They had some of the same features and similar personalities, except Cat Noir was much nicer. There's just this guy. The blonde nodded, like he was trying to listen while not letting his own thoughts wander off. He's not nice, he's horrible and he bullies me. But, we used to be so close and I thought there had to be some reason why he was acting like that. I found out it's just that he hated me. Cat Noir clicked his tongue in disapproval. Really, Spots. You're getting bullied. Just punch the loser back and move on. People like that don't deserve your effort. You've got other friends, right? Yeah, Izuku said, and he reached to fiddle with Cat Noir's belt tail. I wish it was that simple. He's just so, him. Magnetic, amazing, beautifully himself. I know I should hate him and part of me does. But, I'm drawn to him. I started talking like him. Acting like him. He's different from my other friends. Cat Noir lazily dragged his eyes to meet Izuku's. Sounds like you're in love with him or something, handsome. Should I be jealous? No. Izuku exclaimed and shuddered at the possibility. That's ridiculous. It's not like that. There's nothing wrong with you if it is, Red. Izuku nodded while a pit formed in his stomach. He knew the cat hero was right and he didn't really mind when he was flirted with. But that didn't mean he was. Whatever. Izuku decided to change the subject and ask his partner about his own issues. He wasn't exactly sure when their patrol turned into after-dark trauma dumping. Pass. Huh. Pass the question. My problems don't matter. The Izuku began and was silenced by Cat Noir holding up a gloved hand. I've just realized that I've been a bigger butt than I thought I was. Thanks, Mr. Bug. Izuku smiled wide for the first time in a while. He stared up at his partner with stars in his eyes. You said my name. Katsuki's stupid partner had stupid green eyes. They looked eerily similar to Izuku's and the blonde shivered at the look he received. It sparkled with such intoxicating joy, and after his chat with Mr. Bug he realized what he had done. Not that he hadn't spent all night after the incident awake ranting to Plague. For the Kwami to sit there and repeat, I know, I was there, for the 50th time. After returning to his room and changing into his pajamas, Katsuki still found no comfort in knowing what he had to do. Plague, he whispered into the dark, hoping that the Kwami was awake. If he even went to sleep in the first place. I think I'm going to apologize. I just can't explain everything to him. Do you even know how to apologize? You'd think after thousands of years of living you would have a better personality, Katsuki shot back. Of course he knew how to apologize. He was good at everything. Izuku would have no choice but to accept his perfect apology. You're one to talk, the cat-like creature snorted, flying over to the camembert Katsuki left out for him. He shot out an arm, then grabbed the slice of cheese and shoved it into his mouth. Plague looked mortally offended as he locked eyes with his holder watching him chew the cheese. Don't bite the hand that feeds you, Katsuki said. He then felt the need to vomit. Camembert was horrid. He kept his face cold until he couldn't stomach the cheese anymore and rushed to his washroom. Plague yelled after him, You're going to steal my cheese. Threaten me. Then throw it up. You are the worst holder I've ever had, and that's saying a lot because I had one who tried to eat me. Katsuki leaned against the doorway dizzy and he scowled at his Kwami. Plague, if you don't shut up right now I will eat you. Not try. I will. The cat squeaked and flew into one of the cupboards. With a sigh the blonde threw himself onto his bed and didn't bother to situate himself under the covers. He felt the icy wind coming from his open window nip at his skin while he attempted to fall asleep. His phone lit up beside him with messages that he ignored easily. It was all a little too much. He had given Mr. Bug advice on how to deal with his bully. Only to realize that he was exactly the same as said bully. The only difference was he wasn't sure Izuku would be as forgiving as Mr. Bug was. It bothered him realizing that he didn't figure out what was going on until Mr. Bug had brought his own situation to the table. He cared about the spotted hero. His flirting was mostly games, but if he was being honest he had a minuscule crush on his partner. The kind of crush one would have on a celebrity. The difference was Katsuki, well, Cat Noir, got to be around the celebrity all the time. The hero however obviously had opinions. Katsuki had been through the whole internalized homophobia thing. It was tiring, exhausting and most of all, confusing. There was another option that the curly-haired hero wasn't gay. However, Katsuki had heard the way he talked about his bully. That left only two possibilities. He was either gay and desperately in love with his bully, or developing some messed up attachment to the person who was hurting him. Katsuki leant towards the first possibility. He even considered that it could be a mix of both. He knew very well about making excuses for the person he loved. He had done it time and time again for his father. Until the absences and aggression finally crossed the line. The blonde was just worried about that happening to his cheery partner because he knew a lot about boundary lines being toyed with like a jump rope. Eventually someone's foot caught, and the game was over. Izuku crossed the street and was greeted by Mina and Todoroki, who seemed to have been waiting for him. Hey guys. He greeted, lacking his usually jolly demeanor. Mina looked at him funny and she raised a fist to rub her eye. Todoroki slapped the hand away and she blinked at him. You're going to smudge your mascara, Mina, he said plainly with a polite smile. Izuku stared between them and wondered if he should step away. He felt like he was third-wheeling. Are you two going to explain why you waited here for me? Together, Izuku questioned and raised one eyebrow. Mina stuttered and Izuku could see the flush creep up on her dark skin. Todoroki stared at her like he was confused why she was freaking out. Because we're both your friends, Midoriya. The half-and-half boy offered in confusion. He's insinuating, you know. She said exasperated and then covered her mouth realizing what she had let slip. Izuku's eyes shot to his forehead and he laughed loudly. Oh. Was all Todoroki said with the tiniest pout on his face. Mina linked her arms with Todoroki and Izuku and dragged them towards the school. The reason we came to meet you was because we weren't sure if you knew that our classes were shifted for today. They stood in front of the doors as Mina screeched them to a halt. Her face turned grim as realization dawned on her. SHT, she cursed softly. We're going to be late for science, Mina. Todoroki said, missing the reaction on her face. Izuku squeaked next to them. Science class. First PRD. Where he sat beside Bakugou. The light smile that was plastered on his face was smothered by panic. Oh really? I wouldn't have guessed, she sneered and looked down at Izuku. Are you going to be okay? The group stood perfectly still while other students passed them. The freckled boy counted 7 weird glares from others before he nodded in response. The science classroom was loud with the sound of chatter. Their teacher had yet to show up and no one really knew why there was a schedule change. Kirishima was having an arm wrestling contest with Shuji, while Kaminari and Siro hooted and hollered behind them. Ida was showing Tokoyami and Tsu a video of his brother's last race. His brother was a professional race car driver. Uraraka was pretending to float a marker in the air in front of Momo and Hagakure before she revealed it was attached to a strand of her hair. Bakugou sat at the front alone with his feet on his desk as he tapped a pen in his mouth. When his bored gaze landed on Izuku it softened and he dropped the pen onto the table. The noise, which was almost unnoticeable in the grand scheme of things, brought all their classmates' attention to what was going on in the front of the classroom. Deku, he said, and Izuku cringed at the nickname. He was so tired of being called useless. He was so tired of Bakugou. So tired of trying so hard to be wanted. Bakugou, Izuku said with a nod, and he heard a few shocked gasps from around the room. He had never called Bakugou that. It was always Kaken. Todoroki sent an icy glare to their classmates to get them to mind their own business. The fun was over. Everyone returned to their seats, not daring to even glance in the direction of where Izuku walked past Bakugou. Kirishima offered to switch seats with the green-haired boy, who easily agreed. Kirishima slid into the seat beside the blonde and reached out a hand like he was attempting to pet a stray dog. Instead of hitting the crimson-haired boy's hand, he sat frozen, like he couldn't even muster up the energy to shove him away. When the teacher finally arrived, he explained the reason why the classes had been shifted and reassured them it would all go back to normal the next day. Their class had nothing to say. They sat through the lesson silently and murmured thanks to the teacher when he complimented them for working so well. It wasn't out of politeness they were silenced. People didn't talk back to Bakugou Katsuki. They didn't hurt him. They didn't hit him with something that left him frozen. They let him walk all over them. Some even thanked him for doing it. When Izuku had returned to his roof after patrol, he played with the idea Cat Noir had given him. He wasn't going to literally punch Bakugou. He couldn't bring himself to physically hurt him, and he didn't even want to emotionally hurt him. So, he thought of a way to see how much Bakugou cared about the nerd he bullied relentlessly. Izuku thought the nickname was one of the reasons Bakugou hated him. But, he couldn't bring himself to call him something so informal like Bakugou, like they hadn't been best friends since before they even knew what those words meant. If Izuku was being honest, he didn't even know how to say Katsuki. He had called the blonde, Kaken, by accident, and it had stuck ever since. After what happened the day before, Izuku was sure it was going to have no effect. That Bakugou was going to shrug it off and laugh that the nerd had finally stopped calling him that stupid name. Izuku watched his ex-best friend out of the corner of his eye the entire class. He noticed him scratching at his collar like it was choking him and how his focus went in and out. He hadn't even bothered to open his notebook. When Kirishima spoke to him, he just nodded, even if what the sharp-toothed boy had said wasn't a question. Bakugou shot a hand up and with a hoarse voice said, "I'm going to the washroom." He didn't bother to wait for the teacher to approve him, and he jumped out of his seat to make his way out. The red-eyed boy had equally red scratches all over his neck like he had been clawing at his skin. His jaw was clenched so tightly that Izuku's own mouth hurt just thinking about it. The door closed with a loud slam that the teacher made no effort to comment on. With the sound, Izuku finally peeled his eyes off of the door and looked around. It was at that moment he realized everyone was looking at him. And he was only looking at Kaken. Chapter 7. That if you talk enough sense, then you'll lose your mind. Katsuki had read a book about heart attacks once. The symptoms included shortness of breath, nausea, lightheadedness, and chest pains that spread to other areas of the body. He had also read that the average age for heart attacks in men was 65. Even though in his mental list all of the symptoms were all checked off with green marks, he definitely wasn't 65. It had all started when Izuku walked into class and called him his name. It was abnormal, odd, and it didn't sit right in Katsuki's head. It was completely wrong. To most he was Bakugou, to some he was Katsuki, but to only one person was he Kaken. After the name was spat like an insult, even though the green-haired boy hadn't said it that differently than his friends did, the room seemed to shrink in on the blonde. He had never liked things around his neck, so he never wore his tie. His school shirt, which had the first few buttons unclasped, still felt like it was choking him. He scratched at his neck with blunt nails and ignored Kirishima's pointed glares. He wasn't supposed to be sitting beside Kirishima. He was supposed to be sitting beside Izuku. He was supposed to apologize. That plan had gone quickly out the window. Actually, quickly was an understatement. The plan sprinted into a dive out of the window and did a few flips in the air before splattering on the ground. Katsuki decided to go to the washroom instead of the locker room, remembering what had happened the last time. As much as Mina had helped him, he didn't exactly know what was wrong with him, and he wasn't going to trauma dump on her again. Almost no one used the school washroom, so he assumed he was safe to have his freakout there. He leant against the sink and checked over his disheveled appearance in the mirror. Katsuki raked a shaky hand at his jaw and tensed when he saw a figure behind him. Over his shoulder he caught a head of green curly hair. "What the F, Deku? Why are you sneaking up on me?" he asked after clearing his voice. Thankfully, the question had come out raspy and irritated like he had intended it. "I'm using the washroom, Bakugou," Izuku said and pushed past him to turn on the sink. The blonde crinkled his nose in response. "You don't use the school washroom. No one does. You don't seem to know much about me, so how would you know, Bakugou?" Katsuki grabbed Izuku from behind by his collar and pushed him against the wall. The faucet still ran in the background as he took a step forward. "Cut the bullshit. What is this, Bakugou, thing you're doing? Is that not your name?" Izuku said with a shrug. He averted his gaze. Katsuki knew that when the freckled boy did something he felt guilty about, he couldn't stand eye contact. He wasn't fooled by the games Izuku was playing, he just wanted to know why. "It is. But not to F you. You've called me Kaken all of our stupid lives. So why are you changing it now? Why do you care?" Izuku asked and raised a brow. The blonde-haired boy placed his hands in his pockets and was quiet for a moment. "I don't care. I just don't know why all of a sudden you're deciding to change it. Can you just not lie to me for once? You just shoved me against a wall and demanded to know why I called you by your name. Obviously you care, Kaken." When the nickname slipped out, Katsuki relaxed. Everything was normal again. He was going to have to apologize later because he was definitely not doing it in the school washroom and everything was going to be fixed. However, his mind caught on to Izuku's first question. He wasn't quite sure why he cared about the nickname, as it was one of his greatest matters of protest. The blonde decided that it was a matter of routine. Katsuki was Kaken and Izuku was Deku. Just like the sky was blue, the grass was green and the sun shone during the day. "I don't care, nerd. Do you need to get your hearing checked or something? I would have thought you figured that out from our last talk." Katsuki had just pushed Izuku away. It's like the words left his body on reflex. His head snapped to the side involuntarily. Only when Katsuki brought a hand to his cheek and felt the tingling did he realize that Izuku had slapped him across the face. The boy was shaking with his hands balled into fists as he took a step closer. "What the F? You know what, Bakugou? I'm punching back." Katsuki stared at him incredulously. "That was a slap, shitty Deku. Stop calling me that." Izuku cried out with rage. "I am not useless. I am not shitty. I am not a Deku. You keep projecting whatever insecurities you have onto me and I'm so goddamn tired of it. I'm done taking your punches, find a new personal punching bag." Katsuki responded, his voice broken and raw. He didn't even recognize it as his own. "If you stopped bouncing back you wouldn't have to take another hit. I pushed you away. Multiple times. And you keep coming back like AF itch I can't scratch. When will you take the hint that I don't need you? I don't want you." The words were spoken and it felt like Katsuki had signed something without checking the fine print. Like he had read the final line of a chapter only to realize the next page was blank. His mind screamed at him. It wasn't true. He knew it wasn't true. Out of all the things he wanted in the world, from becoming a hero, his father to be present or even his mother being alive again, there was one thing that topped them all. He wanted Izuku. Katsuki learned at a young age there was a difference between things you wanted and things you deserved. He knew he definitely didn't deserve Izuku. Didn't deserve to be looked at like he was some god who walked on water because he didn't feel like he was floating on top. He felt like was being dragged down to the dark depths that welcomed him with a cold embrace as water filled his lungs. He couldn't breathe, he was drowning. And it was entirely his fault. "Fine, Bakugou," Izuku spat, like the name itself was a disgusting word. Katsuki assumed that in the freckled boy's mouth it was, "You don't want me. Well now you don't have me. Good luck finding someone else to put up with your messed up bullshit." Izuku Midoriya didn't hit people and he definitely didn't curse. When Izuku walked out of the washroom slamming the door behind him, he was glad to see his school burning up in flames. Because his day couldn't get any worse after that, right? Students and teachers rushed around him with their shirts pulled over their nose to stop from inhaling the smoke. He calmly exited the building, coming down from the adrenaline rush that was his fight with Bakugou. Izuku stopped in an alleyway and pressed his back against the cold brick. Tiki flew out of his pocket and blinked at him. What? Well, that went well. Tiki exclaimed. Izuku was positive that this was an attempt at sarcasm. The concept was obviously new to the creature and it fell extremely flat. Hearing those words, he finally realized what he had done. Izuku had hit Kaken. Bakugou had hit them a few times in their time of knowing each other. The blonde shoved him around a lot, but he never punched him or kicked him. Sometimes his words felt like knives against Izuku's skin, but that was another story. Izuku had cursed at Kaken. Bakugou cursed a lot. So much so that their teachers gave up on reprimanding him, they just allowed him to do it in hopes that it was some act of rebellion for him and he would get bored when no one gave him attention. They found out the hard way that a large amount of the blonde's vocabulary were curse words. Izuku had unfriended Kaken. But, were they ever really friends? I need to apologize to him, Izuku groaned and tipped his head backwards. No, you don't. Tiki questioned. I hit him, Izuku reasoned. That's way too fa villain. A woman shrieked as she ran past him in the alley clutching her purse close towards her body. Tiki, spots on. Izuku yelled when she was out of view. He unclicked his yo-yo and rounded the corner. He was surprised to see Todoroki gliding on a sheet of ice while flames emitted from the left side of his body. He sent a large blast of fire towards the school which was already burning. When he seemed happy enough with the damage he had caused, he turned around and began to create a path down the street. Izuku would have to deal with that after making sure everyone was safe in the school. Most of the students had gathered outside across the street. With a flick of his wrist, his yo-yo attached to a lamppost, and he pulled himself to land in a crouch in front of the students. His eyes instinctively searched for Bakugou, even though he felt like he had no right to care for the blonde after what had occurred a few minutes earlier. His heart dropped to the floor when Kaken was nowhere to be found. Is everyone accounted for? Izuku asked the principal. He knew that not everyone was there, but there could be others still stuck inside. Yes, everyone is accounted for, except Izuku Midoriya. He's got curly green hair. He glared at the short principal who looked more like a mouse than a human and took off in a run towards the school. A long beam had fallen and was blocking the entrance. He crawled under it and was shocked by how much fire there actually was. His yo-yo could be used for many things, one being breathing in water, which he assumed would work the same as filtering smoke. He wrapped the string around his head and the yo-yo suctioned around his face, allowing him to breathe clean air. Kaken! He yelled, making his way through the smoke. Flames licked at the bottom of the washroom door. Izuku knew he shouldn't touch the door handle because it was probably going to burn him. With a quick movement he tugged it open and felt nothing. He wondered if his suit's temperature was regulated. The entire room was foggy with smoke. He needed to hurry. For two reasons: one, to get Bakugou out, and two, to get to Todoroki before he could cause more damage. Kaken! He called out again, more desperate. The stalls were blocked by pieces of the wall that had caved in. You can't die before I apologize. I didn't mean to hit you, or curse at you. And I know you care, and you just can't die before I talk to you. He braced his hands on the rubble and shifted it out of the way. There was just so much. It was going to take him forever, and the entire building was slowly getting taken over by the flames. SHT. Where is the fire department? Izuku cursed and slumped with a hand leaned against one of the stall doors that was open. Spots. Izuku turned around with tears pooling in his eyes. He had completely failed. Kaken was probably passed out sitting in a stall and was going to die in a washroom. Spots. Arms were shaking his shoulders and he focused on the face in front of him through the smoke. Cat Noir stood in front of him with his pole held in front of his face. His eyes were rimmed with red and it was highlighted by his irises which were a matching color. What are you doing? I was going to go after the icy hot BSTRD, but the principal of this shitty school told me you were still in here. I'm looking for a student. Katsuki Bakugou. Bakugou. The fashion designer's son. Cat Noir asked, looking warily at the flames growing taller beside them. He's fine. I just saw him outside, he complained about having to wait outside and said he was going home. Oh, Izuku whispered, have you been crying? Cat Noir sputtered and regained his composure to respond, none of your business. We need to get out of here before we die. No one is going to be saving Paris if our dead bodies are being cremated in a school washroom. Izuku flinched and dragged Cat Noir through the flames with him to leave. I think our night patrol has gotten you far too comfortable with me. I'm starting to see your red flags. Yeah, mister, I'm in love with my bully and it's totally not in a gay way, I'm the one with red flags. Again, can we talk about this after we get out of the burning building and stop the mayor's son from destroying the city? Cat Noir snapped at him, lacking his usual flirty tone. It seemed all Izuku was doing was getting into fights with blondes with serious vocabulary issues. When they crawled under the beam together and made their way to the grass they both doubled over. The fresh air assaulted their lungs after removing the breathing filters. This job is some seriously messed up bullshit, Izuku said, subconsciously repeating his earlier words, sorry, language, I know. But, come on. We're kids, this is way too much work. The cat hero's face contorted at his first statement. Izuku was starting to think that he was a real hypocrite for his reaction to swearing, especially since he could rival a sailor with the mouth he had. I'm going, Cat Noir gritted through his teeth like the idea of staying to catch his breath for a moment longer was physically hurting him. What? Izuku blurted, because well, what? I really need to punch something. Don't be in my way. With that the hero vaulted himself onto a roof as the fire trucks turned the corner and pulled up towards the school. After fighting multiple villains with his partner he knew that sometimes the boy liked to punch the villains. They usually had powerful abilities that the cat hero was no match for as his only ability was fatal, so he used brute strength. The miraculous ladybugs fixed everything anyways and any damage he did disappeared. But, they couldn't bring people back to life. Tiki was very clear about that when explaining how everything worked to Izuku. There were lines even the Miraculous couldn't cross. Because Izuku knew his partner so well, he knew that he needed to find the villain first. Based on the look in his eye, if that was the case Izuku was going to lose two friends that evening. Chapter 8, When Everything Feels Like the Movies, yeah, you bleed just to know you're alive. Katsuki had managed to get into close combat with Todoroki, or Shudo, which was what he was insisting everyone called him. What's your goal, Todoroki? Katsuki questioned. They were fighting in front of City Hall, which led the hero to believe that this was some family matter that had blown up far too large. He feinted left and came in with his signature right hook that was blocked easily by the half-and-half villain. He dodged to the right as a blast of fire almost hit him, he felt the sweltering heat as it soared past his cheekbone. Katsuki took up boxing and had a very expensive punching bag in his room that was his main way of taking out stress. He was shocked by how Todoroki was able to keep up with him so easily. Don't call me that, he snapped and dropped into a crouch to take out Katsuki's legs. The blonde avoided the attack, then took the opportunity to jump onto Todoroki and take control of the situation. He wrestled him to the ground and scanned his eyes over him to see where the Akuma could be hidden. Cataclysm. He held out his hand close to Todoroki in a claw shape. You try and pull anything icy hot and I'll turn you ashes. He wasn't really going to do anything, because if he killed the boy it wouldn't be very heroic of him and he would probably go to jail. Which, if he was being honest, didn't sound like a very fun idea to the blonde. You're not a very good hero, Todoroki said and squirmed under his grip. He had taken the advice to not use his fire or ice. Do you save everyone with that tone? I noticed your partner's not even here. Got sick of you. Katsuki frowned at him. He avoided the boy in class like the plague ever since the first day. But he knew how the deadpan dork spoke. It was like the Akuma had turned him into a completely different person. Katsuki searched through one of the pockets on Todoroki's hand while still pinning him down with his forearm. The Akuma could be in a variety of different places. If it was somewhere hidden on him, it was going to make his life much easier. As he popped open another pocket, he prayed for the object to lay inside, since he only had one arm to search and it was getting cramped. He was also very aware of his hand that could wipe the boy from existence and was careful to keep it away. Todoroki scoffed. "There's this guy in my class like you. Thinks he's some savior and treats my friend like trash. It's pathetic. You don't know anything about me," Katsuki said and dragged his eyes up to meet heterochromatic ones. Then he snapped. The cat hero gave up on the search and brought his free hand up to punch Todoroki across the face. It didn't end after one punch, or two, or three. All he saw was red and all he could think about was hitting. Over, and over again. Distantly he heard Todoroki scream underneath him. He felt the bicolored boy's struggle under him. He wasn't aware of his hand equipped with cataclysm and pulled it back in a fist to punch once more. If as in slow motion his sight finally returned to him. He wasn't going to be a hero again after this, but his fist didn't stop. Todoroki stared up at him with his eyes as wide open as he could manage them. His face didn't look like the brainwashed villain that Hawk Moth had created, but the boy who sat in his classes. The boy who occasionally laughed with his friends and shared his cold soba with Izuku. The boy who held hands with Mina under the table when he thought no one was looking. The boy who ran up to Misterbug with a bright smile asking questions. He looked like a boy. Katsuki was about to take that away. Only then did his fist still. But the motion was unnoticed as it was stopped forcefully a second after. He looked at his wrist to see a yo-yo string wrapped around it. Cat. His eyes peeled away from the villain to fall on Misterbug, who was a few feet away from him, distraught. Cat Noir rolled off of Todoroki and touched his hand to a pebble he picked up. It turned to dust that the wind carried away. His spotted partner knelt down beside the bleeding boy. Misterbug hovered his hands over Todoroki's body while staring at the wounds. "Shudo," he croaked out, calling him his villain name, and dipped a hand in one of the other pockets on his belt to pull out a Polaroid. He ripped the photo and let it fall to the ground. Even split in half and darkened by the akumatization, Katsuki could make out the faces of Mina and Todoroki together. The butterfly flew solemnly in the air and Misterbug caught it easily. When it was released, it landed on Todoroki's chest as he returned to his normal self. Thankfully, he was out cold, but still breathing. Cat Noir pulled his knees to his chest and he avoided looking at what he had caused. "What were you thinking?" Misterbug asked. A statement that usually had negative connotations felt like it was coming from a place of genuinely concern from the freckled hero's mouth. "You could have killed him. The magic ladybugs don't fix everything." Misterbug opened his yo-yo and pulled a ring out of it. It looked exactly like Katsuki's Miraculous, except it had a black and red polka dot pattern covering it. "This," Misterbug said while he held it up, his voice was shaky, "was my lucky charm. It has no use other than to tell me to stop you." Katsuki kept his eyes down. He couldn't look into another pair of disappointed green eyes. "Cat," a hand fell on his arm, "I don't know why you snapped today, and I'm not going to force you to tell me. But, we're in this together." Katsuki looked up to see not a shred of disappointment on his face, just worry. The lucky charm was thrown into the air and they watched the ladybugs swirl everywhere. First, they shot in the direction of the school and then returned to Todoroki. They swarmed him and sent the butterfly that was resting on his chest away. When they dispersed into the air, his face was completely healed from any of the injuries Katsuki had caused him. Todoroki raised a hand to the back of his head and sat up straight. "What happened?" he asked and blinked a few times confused. "Misterbug. Cat Noir. I got akumatized, didn't I?" "Yes, you did. But don't worry, everything has returned to normal and no one got seriously injured," Misterbug said, switching into his voice that he used when they were talking to civilians, "If it's not too much of a personal question, I want to ask what happened before you got akumatized. If you remember, that is. My father called me and told me about a dinner that he had sprung on me for tonight. But, I had plans with my girlfriend and I told him that. He blew up at me demanding to know more about her. When I explained who she was, he was furious, and said that he was going to arrange someone else for me. Before I could hang up, my brain felt really foggy and a voice started to speak to me." "Do you remember what they said?" Mr. Bug asked, encouraging Todoroki to speak. He shook his head in response and stood up. "I am going to go see my father now. I think it would be best if I talked to him." With a bow, the boy left and entered City Hall behind them. Only when he was finally gone did the reality of their surroundings sink in. Reporters crowded around the barricades that the police had set up to keep the public away from the fight. They leaned over the railings holding their microphones out as the heroes walked past. "Cat Noir. What do you say to the viewers about your violence in that fight?" Katsuki gaped at them for their bluntness. He was too exhausted to make a witty remark and was surprised when Mr. Bug grabbed the microphone angrily. "Well, I say that the viewers should be more focused on the fact that we just saved the city. No one was hurt, that's the bottom line." He then addressed the crowd of reporters, "If all of you have a different view on what being a hero is, then feel free to prove me wrong. Go be that kind of hero instead, and stop complaining about the people who get up every day to risk their lives and keep you safe." With that, Mr. Bug wrapped an arm around Katsuki's waist and flicked his wrist to send them soaring over the nearby roof. They kept going and the blonde simply held on with his eyes closed, breathing in the scent of orange radiating off of the spotted hero while his ring blinked in warning. They landed on their familiar roof with the view of the Eiffel Tower. The two heroes took seats with their backs pressed against opposite sides of the half-wall. Hidden on the top of the roof, they detransformed and fed their kwamis. When the two heroes were suited up again, they sat looking out at the tower. "PND it." Mr. Bug held out his fist with a smile. Katsuki gazed at the fist and he too smiled after their fist bump. "PND it. Okay, so I don't mean to be a therapist," Mr. Bug started and Katsuki sighed, "but I seriously think you need another way to take out your anger. What hobbies do you have?" "Hitting my punching bag." "Yeah, so that's not what I'm looking for. Maybe something more creative." "I sometimes write." "Write what?" Mr. Bug said and leaned forward, seemingly interested in his random hobby. "Little lines of poetry. Nothing special, my mother used to read me poems before I went to bed as a child. It was always a nice way to end his day. Sometimes he'd come home upset from a bad time at school, or he would fall and scrape his knee outside. His mother would scold him loudly, tell him to toughen up, and then would ruffle his hair. They would lie in his bed and her usually scratchy voice would turn soft reading the delicate words. It was something that they just did, even though he had caught his father standing at the door around the corner listening to them once. He still had all the books that she would read. For her funeral he picked her favorite one and gave it to his father for the casket. It was a closed casket, which means he didn't get to see it, but knowing that a part of him laid with her in death brought comfort to him. The other books collected dust as he couldn't bear to read them without thinking about her. His father never offered to read them, but never offered to have them removed from his room either. So they sat waiting to be opened, waiting to be appreciated again. The book sat on his shelf like a piece of frozen time. Appealing and tragic. Maybe you should try something like that. The blonde played with the idea in his mind and hummed. Reading poetry was one thing, writing it was a whole other idea. He was never very good with his words, it was why therapy was quickly cancelled and his relationship with Izuku had crumbled. There weren't any other creative hobbies he had. Fencing was an art form in his eyes, but firstly a sport. Katsuki also never actually played the piano he had and only occasionally toyed with the keys, then he would hit an awkward combination that rang through his room and he would give up. It wasn't that he didn't try new things, he was good at everything anyways. Except his anger never felt like it could be solved with something like drawing little doodles or singing a song. But as his mother used to say when he wouldn't eat his dinner, you never know if you like it until you try it, cats. Katsuki turned towards the Eiffel Tower and realized they had never sat together during the day. It was weird seeing Mr. Bug's hair turn a warm green with golden highlights instead of the cool tone it took during the night. His head took its familiar place on Mr. Bug's shoulder as they fell into a conversation once again. He looked up watching his partner talk and was drawn to the freckles that littered his face. After counting every single one he could see, Katsuki dozed off listening to a story told by a comforting voice. With all the things that had been going wrong in Izuku's life, the cat hero who laid on his shoulder was one of the only right things. He recognized the look that was on Cat Noir's face when he was fighting Todoroki. It was the same look he sported during his argument with Bakugou. Izuku wondered if it was normal for kids their age to have so many problems, because it surely didn't seem fair. He was going to apologize to Bakugou and they were going to move on. Usually, thinking of something like that would send him into a spiral about the blonde. Instead, the thought disappeared and his mind was surprisingly silent. He felt Cat Noir nuzzle into his shoulder, which caused a blush to appear on his face. When he was Mr. Bug he was free from the problems of Izuku Midoriya. He got to be a hero. He got to sit on roofs with his partner and fully escape. Got to live in the quiet between them. The lack of noise was not awkward, it didn't need to be filled. He was completely comfortable sitting in silent harmony. Chapter 9, Driving at 90 down those country lanes, hoo-hoo, we're going to the festival. Mina exclaimed. She jumped in front of Izuku and Todoroki's desk while waving a flyer. Mina. Izuku said and snatched it from her hand, how are we supposed to see it if you keep moving it? She fake pouted, but it was cancelled out by how fast she was bouncing on her toes. Todoroki leaned across the desk and placed a hand on her shaking arm. Well? She asked expectantly. I didn't think it was a question. You kind of just walked over here and said, we're going to the festival, and didn't wait for a response. But, I'll go depending on who else is. Rude. Mina said loudly and multiple of their classmates turned around. What kind of friend are you? You only want to go with other people. Izuku sighed as Todoroki spoke up, I think he's asking because he wants to know if Bakugou is coming. Izuku twitched in his seat as Todoroki's words bounced through the silent classroom. Mina shifted to her other foot and cleared the way for Izuku to lock eyes with Kirishima. The redhead let out a laugh and clapped Bakugou on the back who didn't bother to turn around. Everyone knew that there was no joke told. Kaken. Since the incident they hadn't spoken. They didn't run in the same circles, other than Mina occasionally inviting Izuku and Todoroki out. Which the former would always reject. It was unusual. There were no fights, no insults hurled. Just nothing. They sat in science class and Izuku doodled in his own notebook instead of Bakugou's. When it was time for partner work Izuku worked with Todoroki and Bakugou worked with Kirishima. It was like they simply existed in the same place. Like they just happened to breathe the same air. It was absolutely horrible. Izuku had been meaning to apologize, but Tiki talked him out of it. He knew that Bakugou had to apologize too, if anything the blonde should be the first one to do it. The green-haired boy always had a problem with apologizing, so it felt weird to have tension lingering. Except it wasn't really tension. It fizzled out into nothing unless someone brought it up and Izuku had to admit it was nicer than getting pushed around every day. A messed up part of him wanted Bakugou to shove him and call him Shitty Deku again, or just Deku. Shitty Deku honestly just felt redundant and unnecessary. Who else? Mina's pained smile widened at the question. Kiri, Kaminari, Momo, Jairu, Siro, and you too. If you're coming of course. She had responded slightly quieter as to not have others here who weren't invited. However, knowing Mina she probably invited the whole class. Okay, I'll go. So will Todoroki. She planted a kiss on Izuku's bi-colored friend's cheek and hopped back to her desk as Aizawa entered the room holding his sleeping bag. I will. Todoroki whispered to Izuku, confused. Yeah, you will. If I'm going, so are you. Also, I want you to ride the Ferris wheel with Mina. Todoroki turned bright red and faced the front while Aizawa began his lesson. Izuku smiled at him and began to take notes. He had started color-coding things and his notes were becoming easier and easier to revise. He had also changed the layout to one he had in his head that he couldn't quite remember where it had been from. Why? Todoroki said when Aizawa sat down at his desk. 'Cause it's cute, Izuku shrugged. I mean, if you don't want to, you don't have to, it was just a suggestion. No. His friend replied quickly and gestured his hands in the air. Izuku smiled at his hopeless friend. How he had gotten a girlfriend before Izuku was a mystery. Whether he was going to keep her was a completely different story. The freckled boy rested his hand on his chin while Todoroki worked beside him. He watched Bakugou complete his assignment with his aggressive scrawl. The blonde had his jacket hung on the back of his chair and his sleeves were rolled up to his forearm. A vein popped in his arm as he held the pencil tight. Bakugou must have sensed he was being watched and he turned his head slightly at Izuku, who averted his eyes to his notebook. He pretended to look very focused in his notes before Bakugou turned back around. The festival was going to be interesting. It looked more like a carnival to Izuku when he arrived. Him and Todoroki walked together after getting ready at his house. Izuku hadn't seen many of his classmates outside of school, and since his fashion hobby was well known, he was prepared to dress to impress. Izuku had thrown on a pair of old jorts with a brown leather belt. On top he wore an All Might graphic tee. He had an extensive collection of merch from the fictional hero, layered over top of a white long sleeve, and slung his brown bag over his shoulder. He wore a simple necklace around his neck and left his Miraculous clipped on his ears. After slipping on white socks, he put on his favorite red shoes. Todoroki was not excited to get styled by the fashion prodigy. Izuku had to wrestle him into a pair of gray wide-legged jeans and decided that layering more than one shirt would probably overstimulate the boy. He settled for a plain white short sleeve and somehow convinced Todoroki to at least wear one of his jackets over top because they were going out at night. They decided on Izuku's favorite brown leather jacket. We're definitely overdressed, Todoroki said as they waited on the sidewalk beside the festival entrance. You are wearing a pair of jeans, Todoroki. You are not overdressed. Plus, have you ever met Mina? Everyone will definitely be dressed nicely. I think this is the first time I'm seeing some people not in their school uniforms. Izuku said and reached for his phone from his bag to scroll until their friends arrived. First, Momo, Jairu and Mina arrived. Momo was dressed classy, her outfit screamed that she had money. Jairu was in black and purple. She wore denim mini shorts with fishnets underneath and combat boots that Izuku complimented when he first saw her. As expected, Mina was head to toe in cheetah print and pink. She ran over and kissed Todoroki on the cheek. Wow! Midoriya, you made him so pretty, Mina said as she poked her boyfriend in the cheek. Izuku laughed. Most people didn't do relationships at their age. 15 wasn't too young, but it definitely wasn't old either. It was nice to see Mina and Todoroki having fun together. Izuku turned towards the festival and the corners of his mouth turned up. He liked getting to act like a normal teenager. The boys pulled up all together. Kaminari, Kirishima and Shiro dressed casually much like Todoroki. See, I told you we're not overdressed, Izuku said as he nudged Todoroki in the arm. Finally, Izuku's eyes landed on Bakugou. He walked behind the group of boys with his hands in the pockets of his dark green parachute pants. On top he wore a black tank top with a skull on it and a look in eyes like he couldn't even bother to pretend to be happy to be there. Okay. Mina shouted, standing in front of the group. Rules are. There are none. Have fun, stick together, or don't. I don't care. She linked her manicured hand with Todoroki's and pulled him through the entrance. He waved with his hand back at the group before they disappeared into the crowd. Does anyone else think they brought us here just so they could go on a date? Zero asked with an eyebrow raised. Think so, Zero. Kaminari teased, here I thought I was the dumb one. You are the dumb one, Jiraiya said and began to enter the festival. Kaminari scoffed, but jogged to walk beside her and attempt to make conversation. Momo fidgeted with her fingers and Izuku realized the girls had left her. He entered the festival with her and she offered a polite smile. Around them buzzed pure joy. There were food stalls that made all their mouths water, children running around with sticky fingers from eating too much candy, games, and rides. At the back of the festival was the Ferris wheel, where Izuku assumed Todoroki and Mina were headed. Where are we going to go first? Kirishima asked as they stopped in front of the High Striker. Strength competition. Kirishima fished through his pockets for some money and handed them to the man running the game. You know those are a scam, right? Izuku said softly so the worker wouldn't hear. You probably only think that because you've never beaten one. Izuku froze, along with the rest of the group who looked at him for his reaction. So they were on speaking terms. The green-haired boy decided not to make it awkward and responded with a chuckle, I'd like to see you try, Kaken. Is that a challenge, Zuku? Izuku was going to melt into the floor. He didn't know if this was some sort of apology that he was just supposed to figure out. The blonde had taken what he said and listened. He had expected Kaken to call him Midoriya. But, it seemed like Izuku wasn't the only one to come to the conclusion that Midoriya and Bakugou sounded far too informal for who they were to each other. Which one do you want? Bakugou said as he gestured towards the prizes. Ha! Izuku squeaked. He was very disoriented. Had they made up and he didn't remember? Were they friends and the entire thing had been a dream? His eyes scanned Bakugou's for a moment and immediately regretted it when he saw the way the festival lights caught his eyes. Hiding his flush from the blonde, he pointed at the stuffed black cat with the beige knit scarf around his neck. Okay, nerd, Bakugou said, and Izuku swore that he saw the smallest amused smile on his face, I'll win it for you and you can eat your F-words as a midnight snack. After Kirishima failed to hit the jackpot, he muttered something about manliness. He handed the hammer to Bakugou. The blonde's arms were on display from the tank top and Izuku wondered how at their age he was so ripped. Izuku was fit himself, except his strength was mostly in his legs. He was definitely not Bakugou level strong, however. His muscles flexed and unflexed as he gripped the hammer. With a slam the bell rang loudly. The worker looked shocked and he handed the prize over grumpily. Kaken stood with his arms crossed against his chest while he looked at the stuffed cat. Told you. Next time win me an apology, Kaken. Izuku said and slapped a hand to his mouth embarrassed. Oh my god. That was I don't know why I said that. No, Bakugou said and ran a hand through his hair with a sigh, you're right. Kirishima's eyes widened. Jiraiya took out her headphones and didn't even seem to mind when Kaminari leaned on her. The best part about apologies is you don't have to win one. So, I'm sorry. I'm going to say it in front of all these extras so I can prove it, even though they don't deserve to hear the words from my mouth. We're your friends. Kaminari said, offended, and Jiraiya smacked him in the back of the head. I'm sorry for being in butt. For saying SHT, treating you like SHT and shoving you around. I can't promise that I'm going to be nice. That's not me. But, I'm done being a shitty bully. That's a loser thing to do and I am not a loser. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, or be my friend because even I don't think we're there yet. This apology is me telling you I'm going to try, and if that's not enough for you, I can live with that. Nothing can change what I've done, but I can stop myself from doing more damage. Thank you, Kaken. Was all Izuku said. He didn't apologize profusely himself, or immediately accept it because he knew that's not what Bakugou needed. He needed to prove himself, he needed to feel like his forgiveness was earned. He wouldn't quite understand that Izuku would always forgive him before he even apologized. The green-haired boy knew that it was bad to have that outlook. But everyone made excuses. Izuku just made more for Kaken. The group began to walk once more, and after Kaminari cracked a ridiculous joke the tension dispersed. Izuku stopped in front of the death drop. It wasn't too tall because it was just a festival ride. It was also on Izuku's bucket lists of things to do in his life. Yeah, so no. Shiro said, stopping beside Izuku, those things are not safe at festivals. And the giant Ferris wheel is. Izuku deadpanned and eyed the others to see if they would join him. All of them shook their heads. I never said anything about the Ferris wheel. Shiro exclaimed and put his hands up in defense. Come on. I'm not doing it alone, Izuku pleaded. They all looked at him like they were about to cave in. He just had that effect on people. He put on his big puppy dog eyes with a tiny pout and most gave in. It was manipulative, sure. But, he really wanted to go on the death drop ever since he saw it in a movie once. If I do it with you, will you stop whining, nerd? Izuku glitched as he slowly turned around. As much as he wanted to do the death drop, he was also very scared of heights, which is why he didn't want to go alone. Even though they had just had an odd heartfelt moment, he wasn't about to have a mental breakdown beside Bakugou. Oh, it's okay. You don't have to. You almost started crying when everyone else said no. Let's go, Izuku. How was Izuku Midoriya supposed to say no to that? Chapter 10, Too young to think about all that SHT. Katsuki knew Izuku was afraid of heights. They had once gone to an amusement park after they were finally tall enough to be able to go on all the rides. After the first roller coaster, Izuku was in tears and their families decided that they were done for the day. The two boys ended up sitting on a bench eating ice cream together while their parents made conversation. However, Katsuki had just faced his fear of apologizing and he had seen the stupid look in Izuku's eyes that he just couldn't say no to. It was also the start of his path to forgiveness, by doing something so dumb that Kaminari wouldn't even do it. He was definitely going to regret it if Izuku had some sort of panic attack while they were up there. But he knew that Izuku would find a way to do it whether he had the proper emotional support or not. So Katsuki played it safe and caved in. They waited for seconds in the non-existent ride, which should have been strike one for both of them to realize that this idea was not the best. When they strapped in, it almost began before the worker could check them, and when he did he saw that Izuku wasn't in properly. Strike 2. Nonetheless it started and they rose into the air. Oh my god, Izuku said in a high voice while looking at his dangling feet. Kaken, I think this was a bad idea. We're not that high up and this thing has to be safe or it wouldn't be allowed, Katsuki reassured in the nicest tone that he could muster. What if it falls too fast and we hit the ground? What if I fall out? What if you fall out? What if we both fall out? Katsuki rolled his eyes at the panicking boy beside him and reached out his hand. How they had gone from not talking to this was bewildering. Izuku's eyes flickered to the hand and he didn't waste a second gripping it tightly. I'm right here. I'm not going to fall out and neither are you. Squeeze as tight as you want, nerd. He groaned. Internally. This was breaking multiple of his rules and the major one that ruled over the smaller ones. Not being friends with Izuku was rule number 1 and it quickly became not being friendly to Izuku as his father dove deeper into his grief. It's not like they were friends, this was a one-time thing and Katsuki was starting to think Mina had drugged him. Once they finally reached the top, Izuku squeezed hard with his eyes closed to tease them for a moment by jolting down slightly and raising back up. Izuku hiccuped in surprise, with his eyes still clenched shut. It continued to drop and then rise again, not fully making the full descent. Open your eyes, Katsuki instructed. He definitely wasn't going to do all of this just for Izuku to complain later that he wished he had opened his eyes. You're going to miss it. I'm scared, Izuku whispered in a tiny voice. Katsuki responded with a squeeze to his hand, he brushed his thumb back and forth. If you don't do it you're going to regret it. The blonde turned his neck to look at Izuku who opened one eye slowly and then the other. They went wide and darted to look at the view around them. The sun was in the middle of setting on the horizon and the sky was painted with hues of pink and orange. The clouds looked like cotton candy floating in the air and the city itself was appealing. Even though they weren't too high up, it was a gorgeous sight nonetheless. Izuku relaxed his hand and smiled widely. "It's so pretty, Kaken." Still looking at the freckled boy, he said softly, "Yeah, it is." Then a drop. Izuku shrieked and Katsuki laughed as they fell. Katsuki had had a smile plastered on his face the entire evening. It didn't go away until he arrived home to notice the door of his father's study cracked open. Inside he heard the hushed voice of Natalie. "Masaru, you're not getting any closer, we've tried multiple times now and every single person has failed." Katsuki pressed himself against the door. With a slam of his hand on the table, Katsuki's father replied, "You don't think I know that? You saw what happened last time, we're getting closer. Just because one of them lost control, doesn't mean that they're going to slip up." He leaned closer and accidentally pushed the door in more. It creaked loudly and the voices disappeared. Natalie's heels clicked on the floor as she approached it before Katsuki could run away. "Katsuki. When did you get home?" she inquired, while tapping her toe nervously. Over her shoulder, Masaru had his jaw clenched and was turned towards his desk. "Just now." "Where did you go?" his father asked sharply and took his place behind Natalie. "To the festival. With some of my classmates." "Which ones?" Katsuki swallowed and took a step away from the door. Natalie wore a pitying look on her face as she moved out of the way for Masaru to leave the design room for the first time in a very long while. It was a disturbing sight for Katsuki to see his father standing in their entryway. He was dressed in a clean white suit and wore shiny gray shoes even though they were inside. "No one special, Raccoon Eyes got a bunch of us together," he mumbled. His father didn't know the names of his friends anyways, so Katsuki didn't feel the need to use them. Was Izuku there? The blonde grit his teeth in preparation to lie. However, he didn't want to. After his apology to Izuku, he was prepared to stick to his word and try to be better. If Katsuki told his father that he was speaking to the freckled boy again, he would probably be sent to London before the week was over. "Yeah, he's friends with Pinky's boyfriend." "Katsuki," his father said firmly. But Katsuki wasn't having it. He wasn't going to allow Masaru to lecture him about his own life, when he couldn't even bother to remember where Katsuki had gone out. "What? Are you going to send me away? 'Cause last I checked you're already doing that. Even though there's not really a purpose because you spend every waking moment in that room. For someone who seems to care so much about what do, you also know nothing. You didn't know where I went tonight, you don't know any of my friends, and you don't know anything about Izuku and I. Honestly, can you just F off?" Without waiting for a response, he turned away to sprint up the stairs. Before he slammed his door, he heard his father yell out his name once again. He didn't care what Masaru had to say. It was probably going to be some excuse about how Izuku wasn't good enough for them. If his father told him the truth on why he wasn't allowed to talk to the freckled boy, maybe he would have heard him out, but the lies were what set him off. Plague, claws out. With his pole he poked his window open, and hopped out. Katsuki was definitely late to their patrol, but thankfully Misterbug had also needed to push it back later into the night anyways. He arrived onto the roof and Misterbug was waiting there pacing back and forth. He watched for a moment cloaked in darkness. The spotted hero seemed like he was deep in thought, but overall seemed relaxed and positive. "What's your deal, handsome?" Misterbug jumped at the sudden intrusion. He looked happy with a smile on his face that was causing his eyes to crinkle. "Well, I dealt with the guy and I think we're on good terms now," Misterbug explained happily. Katsuki chuckled, remembering how his problem too had been solved. "That's more than he probably deserved," Katsuki said. Misterbug gave him vague details of what happened and the blonde's mind couldn't help but connect it to his own experience with Izuku. Hearing the way the spotted hero talked about his ex-bully formed a lump in Katsuki's throat. To think that he could have made Izuku feel the way that Mr. Bug had felt made him sick to his stomach. "How about you?" Mr. Bug asked when he finished speaking. "No personal details of course, but how was your day?" "Surprisingly good." Katsuki responded, deciding it was better to pretend that his confrontation with his father never happened. Mr. Bug reached into his yo-yo and tossed a pack of cards onto the roof. "Wanna play?" Katsuki had a real problem with challenges. Any time it sounded like someone was remotely challenging him, he had to make sure to do it and be the best. His old therapist had told him that he didn't need to feel like he always had to win. It's not that he felt like he always had to win. It's just he knew he was going to win and there was no way he was going to take something easy when he could give it his all. Katsuki kneeled down and spilt the